Welcome back to the Orthodox Ethos. I'm Father Peter Heers, and this is a Orthodox Ethos extended podcast dedicated to Orthodoxy and America 250 years after its establishment. We'll be right back with that analysis. Well, the Orthodox Church in America has come a long way since its very early founding in the far northwest in Alaska, coming over from Valam Monastery. We'll talk about the history a little bit tonight. We'll talk about some of the aspects of the lives of the saints that have come down to us. We'll recap a little bit about the progress, historical periods that the church went through, and we'll also look at something we're calling Ameridoxy. It's a phenomenon that has especially erupted in the last few decades, and it is something that is kind of a reaction against the ethnophiletism that is found in certain corners of the church. But is it actually the royal path? We'll talk about that, and we'll look forward to a good, robust discussion. Before we get to that, I just want to, let's say, welcome and greet everybody. That's the word. Greet everybody on the feast of St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco. Of course, today, according to the church calendar, the so-called old calendar, we have the Feast of St. John, July 2nd. And most of the Orthodox world together, whether new or old calendar today, remembers St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco, the great wonder worker. And we had the great pleasure of having a vigil last night and divine liturgy this morning. And we had veneration of the relics, and we had koliva for the saint, and we had a wonderful meal afterwards. And hopefully all of you have also, in America especially, celebrated the feast of the great saint, the great wonder worker. As I said in the homily this morning, I wanted to share with you because I think it's some important aspects of the life before we jump into the main topic tonight. But I can't resist, because we love St. John. In our household, our chapel in our house in Greece is dedicated to St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco. We have a wonderful icon, hand-painted icon of St. John there. And we were very grateful to God to be able to be very closely involved in the translation and publication of his life in Greek. I had the pleasure to write the preface to that, and then also the life of Father Seraphim Rose. And we helped to spread the memory and the veneration of St. John and Father Seraphim throughout the Greek-speaking world. So this is a major feast day for us. It is also happens to be our wedding anniversary. We were married on this feast day in 2000. So very important to us. So we want to say one or two words before we jump into the main topic tonight. It is customary, or rather characteristic of our Lord, that he chooses, as he did with the apostles, the so-called foolish to shame the wise of the world, right? And people looked at St. John, who was externally disheveled, many times walking without shoes. He had a slur, and it was hard to understand some of his homilies. There were aspects of his social appearance that bothered the more worldly parishioners in his parish, especially in Paris, in France, and they wrote complaining to the first hierarch, Archibald and Anastasi, and said he must wear shoes. This is a disgrace. And so they sent him shoes, as Bishop Sava relates, and he put them under his arm, and he kept walking. And they complained again to the Metropolitan. And the Metropolitan again wrote and said to St. John, why aren't you wearing your shoes that we sent you? And he said, well, I'm sorry, you said to have, there was a discrepancy in the language. It could mean two different things in Russian. And so that's what I did. You didn't say it actually have to wear them. So he was obedient and he wore the shoes. The point is here that in a variety of ways, the humble, the meek, the not according to the world wise or beautiful or whatever, are chosen by the Lord to shame and to show the hierarchy of things, the spiritual hierarchy. And we should ask ourselves, if we were there in the parish, in the little parish in Paris, and we were immigrants and we were Russians and we wanted to be well thought of by the local population, the French, and they cared a lot about how things appeared, would we have not perhaps acted in the same way as those critics of St. John? Or would we have seen past it and seen the great sanctity and the true wisdom of St. John? But St. John, of course, did much, much more than just shame the so-called worldly wise by his way of life. He was a wonder worker. He was an amazing and tremendous ascetic. He, of course, slept very little, and when he did, it was usually in a chair, sitting for decades. He was an ascetic that was unparalleled, and yet he was in the world, and he was a pastor, and he was a shepherd. He was a man of great akrivia, exactitude. Many times we like to either justify ourselves or forgive ourselves for our lack of struggle. We like to hear the pastor say to us, "Don't worry, do your best. It's okay." Don't. We like to generally be encouraged in a kind of orthodoxy which is not according to akrivia, according to the exactitude, according to the ascetic struggles, right? And we often easily criticize those who call us to a greater struggle, a greater exactitude in our faith. St. John was, in all things, dedicated to the akrivia, the exactitude of the saints, whether it be the dogma, of course, first and foremost, or the ethos, but also the typicon, the liturgical services, and many details that you can find in his life that he cared greatly to be obedient, to be humble, to follow the Holy Fathers. This is something we need desperately in our American and Western context, where we are surrounded by laxity and comfort, and we tend to default to that, right? But is it in our best interest spiritually? We read the lives of the saints. We read St. John to imitate him. That's why we read the lives of the saints, to imitate the saints, not to simply commemorate them and celebrate their great love of Christ. No, to be like them. And that's what they want more than anything. Everything that the church gives us is for us and for our salvation. It's for us to come closer to Christ. And so when we read the lives of the saints, when we read St. John's great ascetic struggle, it's not just for St. John. People say, well, I'm not a monk. Or they'll say, well, that's for the saints. You're not a saint. And you have this kind of mentality which has aspects of truth in it, right? They're not lying. We're not St. John. They're not lying. We're not monks. And yet, are we saying those things to our own spiritual benefit? Or are these ways to justify and, remain essentially as is, instead of growing, going deeper, refining, purifying, and becoming more committed to the image and the likeness in our daily life? So in any case, we could go on talking about St. John all night. Hopefully you are, if you do not have the life, buy the life of St. John. If you're not familiar with it, read it. There's two versions in English. There's from the St. John the Wonder Worker by Father Seraphim Rose and the St. Herman Brotherhood, first version that came out. And there's one from Nicodemus Press, Man of God. And there's several other publications that have to deal with it. And of course, his writings we have on the veneration of the Mother of God and his wonderful defense of the Orthodox veneration of the Mother of God against the various extremes and distortions, including the legalistic papal Protestant understanding, the Protestant Reformed understanding, the Nestorians, or whatever it might be. St. John, a great theologian, but not an academic theologian, but a true patristic theologian who was very well versed in the hymnography of the church, dogmatic consciousness formed by someone who pays attention to the hymnography of the church. Very important. There's so much to learn in the life of St. John. I hope that you'll take this admonition to heart and go and and read the life of St. John. Buy it, get it, download it, listen to it, and don't let these feast days pass by without some serious heart-to-heart, right? And just begin right now. I fast, but do I fast weekly in a kind of sick way, like just barely fast? I don't like fasting. I keep the fast according to the type, but I actually eat a bunch every Wednesday and Friday. You need to start addressing that. Life is very short. All these things matter. The details matter. In the life of St. John, he paid attention to the details, not out of some kind of legalistic, moralistic, religiosity. No, out of love for Christ. And of course, that's presupposed, right? When we do all these things for Christ and in Christ, then they take on tremendous significance in our life. So enough of that. Let's go into our topic tonight. We're looking back at 250 years since the founding of the United States. This year, 2 days, we have the 4th of July. And we're looking forward, and we're looking at today's church a little bit, and we're looking forward into some of the challenges that we have that we're facing. So let's begin by looking at our history. 1 second, let me just, and just deal with one little issue here, and then we're ready to go. So I would say that let's start right here. Let's start with Orthodoxy right now in our day and talk about this historic moment. We are facing probably the most promising period in the whole history of the Orthodox Church in terms of missionary outreach, and yet I would say the most problematic, the most promising, and yet the most problematic. This is a crucial period for the Orthodox Church. In my short analysis and reflection on the history of the church in North America, we've gone from a very humble, ascetic, monk missionary, face-to-face missionary effort up in Alaska with the natives to a very fast-paced, global, online, multi-jurisdictional, catechetical, very heady, rationalistic approach to orthodoxy that can become an ideological approach if one is not careful. It's becoming very complex today, but also very consequential. Now we can sit like we are right now behind a screen talking to hundreds or thousands of people, and thousands and 10,000s and hundreds of thousands of people are on their way to orthodoxy, something, of course, could never have happened in the history of the Orthodox mission to North America. So there's great potential, but great potential for disaster as well. And we need to consider that. We'll come back to that toward the end of tonight's little presentation. We have to become very well versed in our predecessors. It's incumbent upon us, if we're truly Orthodox Christians and pastors and teachers, it's incumbent upon us to become conscientious about what they've given us, consciously looking back to them. So we're going to look at aspects of the lives of the saints tonight, like St. Tikhon, or St. Raphael, or St. Sebastian, or St. Innocent, St. Herman. We already talked a little about St. John. But if we don't do that, then we're really undermining our ability to have fidelity, stay faithful to what's been passed down to us. Most of you, I think, have paid a little attention to church history in America, but if not, this will be an education, hopefully. If you have, then you might hear some things for the second time, and it's good. It's good to have repetition. As we said, it is the roots of Orthodoxy, rather, in North America are going back to the northern Athos, the Valam Monastery. It's called the Northern Athos. The Valam Monastery that sent over 8 Russian monks, and from the decade of 1790s, right at the end of the 18th century, all the way through after the Civil War in 1867. So about 75 years, this was the heart and the focus of the entire mission in North America. It was in Alaska. It was in Northwest North America. And they were baptizing, catechizing, establishing parishes for the natives, the Aleuts, the Alitik, or the Tlingit peoples. And then in 1840, St. Innocent of Alaska came and established a diocesan seat in Sitka, Alaska. And then in 1867 became really a major historical marker. Russia sold Alaska to the United States. At that point, the indigenous population was about 12,000 members, 12,000 converts from 1794 to 1867. That's the first era, let's say, of Orthodoxy in America. The second great era started in the 1870s with European immigration. And after the sale of Alaska, the diocesan seat came down in 1872 to San Francisco, and then later on to New York in 1903, in recognition of the massive influx of immigrants that started coming from the old world and from Orthodox countries. In 1890, in the census, U.S. Census Bureau surveyed the churches, and they had a total of 13 Orthodox churches in the territory of the United States, with one Russian church in San Francisco and one Greek church in New Orleans. So 14,000 Orthodox, only 600 outside of Alaska. Someone in the chat is talking about the 6th century from the British Isles. Yes, St. Brendan. Indeed, we had Orthodox monks coming over many, many centuries ago, but we're not going to be talking about their presence. It's almost unknown exactly to what degree they were here, but there is signs that they were here in North America. But there's no real history associated with it. Between 1890 and 1906, the church grew through immigration, but also through mass conversion of the Uniates. The Eastern Catholics, so-called Eastern Catholics, came over through the work of St. Alexis Toth. We'll talk about that in a second. But it went already in just 16 years, it jumped to 130,000 Orthodox Christians, Greek, Russian, Serbian, Syrian, and of course also the Uniates coming back. By 1916, they were recording about 250,000 Orthodox in America. So in those 26 years, American Orthodoxy grew by 1,685%, nearly 18 times the original size. So that is a pretty massive change in the whole pastoral orientation of the Orthodox Church in North America. By 1924, with mass immigration coming over from all of the Balkans, Greece, Russia, Middle East, you have about, just for example, 600,000 Greeks, it's said, to have arrived during this period up until the 1920s. Of course, we had massive world-changing events going on. World War I, the Great Asia Minor catastrophe and massacre by the Turks, and massive changes in Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution. You saw massive changes displacing hundreds of thousands, millions of Orthodox Christians from their homeland to other parts of Europe, but also to the New World. And so by the time of the Russian Revolution, the still unified North American Orthodox diocese that would have been under St. Tikhon and then his successor, the Russian mission in America, the unified North American Orthodox diocese had exploded into a continent-wide body featuring over 350 parishes, its own seminary, and hundreds of thousands of faithful. The 1920s, all the way past Second World War, is our third major period. And it saw tremendous trials for the church. As we already said the Asia Minor catastrophe. You had the divisive innovations of Meletios Metexakis in the Patriarchate of Constantinople, one of the most divisive and most problematic personalities in the history of the Orthodox Church. Meletios Metexakis, is a tragic figure who brought about tremendous division through his innovations. That also created upheaval among the Greek Orthodox, first and foremost, because of the calendar change and the adoption of novel ecclesiological ideas. But you also had upheavals for all of the Orthodox people because of the political changes that were going on. And so you had, unfortunately, divisions among Orthodox during these decades, divisions between Russians, divisions between Serbians eventually because of communism, Syrians. There was a division for a time in the North American diocese. There were divisions even among Romanians. And of course, Greeks with, as I said, the calendar change and innovations. So these would last decades. They would last decades, some of them all the way up into the 90s. For instance, the Serbian diocese in North America was not reunited until Patriarch Pavel and his great spiritual personality brought an end to that temporary administrative division. The Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, of course, the most famous of the diaspora churches in many ways because of its tremendous monastic and Orthodox and ascetic phronema that it brought to America, but also because it was in exile and cut off from the Patriarch of Moscow, because from especially 1928 and onward, you had total capitulation on the part of Metropolitan Sergius and others with him. And so there was a de facto and pastorally imperative separation on the part of the Russian church abroad. And you had that going on all the way up until 2008. So you had these divisions between the Orthodox that would last decades. And in spite of this, though, in spite of these trials, these tribulations, the church nonetheless continued to grow. Monasteries were founded, translations were made, mission was brought beyond the confines of the ethnic parishes. St. John famously said, for instance, that one of the main reasons why the Lord allowed for the diaspora of all the Russians was to bring Orthodoxy to the four corners of the world, to bring it to the West. And that's clearly been vindicated, his understanding in the 50s. How much more today can we see that this was truly allowed by God, a providential allowing, not a willing, of course. Diaspora is a terrible and destructive thing to a people's, but because of our sins, because of the devil's machinations, because of the disintegration of the Christian West and all that implied with the rise of the totalitarian regimes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, God allowed this in his great wisdom for the sake of the heavenly mission of producing witnesses of the resurrection. Even as her garments were ragged, worn, and bloodied, nonetheless, the church shone, as St. John Chrysostom said, shone brighter than the sun. The fourth, I would say, major period of Orthodox history is from the post-war to the post-Cold War Orthodox America. Post-war, 1950s, to post-Cold War, 1980s, you had a gradual shift from a fractured collection of isolated immigrant-led enclaves into an increasingly unified, English-speaking, and culturally engaged American presence. In the latter decades, especially in the 1980s, you saw this explosive growth, both through personalities like Peter Gilchrist and his other evangelicals who brought in 2,000 Orthodox and 2,000 evangelicals into Orthodoxy in 1988, the Antiochian Archdiocese. Father Seraphim Rose and his great impact in terms of the Orthodox mission to the English-speaking world. You had somebody like Vincent Rossi, who led in with others, of course, but was very notable in leading in the Order of Mans, so-called Order of Mans, a kind of New Age Christian group, but found Father Seraphim Rose's writings, met up with his co-ascetic, and were eventually catechized, eventually all brought into canonical Orthodoxy. 1,000 souls have been, many of them become great servants in the clergy, and others and missionary work throughout Orthodox America in the Bulgarian church, the OCA, the Russian church abroad, and the Serbian church. You see that those great, zealous lovers of Christ who came through that order of man's, and then eventually the Christ the Savior Brotherhood, they all came into Orthodoxy. So this period, especially the late 80s, saw this massive growth in Orthodox mission comparatively. But since then, how much more we can talk about 25, 30 years later in the post-COVID period. We'll talk about that toward the end. Since the fall of Soviet Union in 1989, even though in significant ways parts of the church in America was in the midst of a convert surge, as we said, missionary awakening, there was also now a massive influx of immigrants, waves of immigrants flooding into parishes which were ever more American in identity. But this contributed to a revitalizing of their ethnic cultural identity. So in the 90s, you had, and then in the 2000s, you had now, as opposed to before it was just basically up into the 80s, you had a fairly solidified ethnic oriented and ethnic identity of the jurisdictions. Now you have this huge influx of converts who are now also making converts, and they're coming into the churches, and slowly over the last 40 years, you have a massive turn toward indigenous English-speaking missionary orientation, even among the so-called ethnic parishes. But you definitely have a time period where there's tension, right? And there's how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this on a personal level, on an ecclesiastical level? And that was what the 80s and 90s. I became Orthodox in 1992, and I can say with some great confidence, having spent most of the 90s in America before I went to Greece, that it was a very different, on the ground among the faithful, very different reality than it is today. And I think it's much better in terms of mission than it ever has been. But we were, as the convert groups, we knew each other. It was a small world comparatively to today. And we knew the monasteries and the people, and the monasteries of Elder Fem were just beginning in many places of the United States in the early 90s. And they of course, hugely impacted the church in the last 35 years in many, many ways. Many of those not seen in any kind of survey, obviously. But for about 30 years, you had seemingly two opposed orientations, right? Just to recap, I think we can say from 89 to 19, right? 2019, let's say. You had two seemingly opposed orientations, generally speaking, a missionary, catechetical, English-speaking orientation, and then a more preservationist, cultural oriented and mother tongue, right? Can maintain the mother tongue. Very important for the identity of the immigrant and the Orthodox who are coming over, not to be sucked into the wurbala, right? To be lost to the great melting pot. I think it's very admirable that they want to maintain the Orthodox identity that they grew up with. So those two things had to somehow coexist, and I think they did. And in fact, I think it's both of them have become, in the best case scenario, right? They've become sharpened each other, right? They helped each other ultimately. And it is both and. They both are necessary. It would be a tragedy for one to be lost. And this is how Providence arranged it. We have to accept the fact that Providence arranged it this way. You converts, most of you who listen to me are converts. You need the old grandmothers and grandfathers and the old generation, the broken English speakers, right? You need their piety. You need their ethos. And it is not in your benefit, to your great benefit, to despise that. You need to humbly accept it and come and follow and listen. That's the wise man. The wise man listens to the older generation, listens to the Orthodox who've been generations and centuries and millennia, in some cases, Orthodox Christians, right? thousands of years in the Greek-speaking world, in Palestine, in the Middle East. These have been Orthodox Christians. We are just little babes. Culturally, spiritually, we have to humble ourselves, and we need the so-called ethnic Orthodox, so-called cradle Orthodox. So the so-called convert Orthodox need to learn the ethos of the church from those who carry it within themselves as a way of life. And the so-called cradle Orthodox need the zeal of the convert and their love of the truth of our faith. So both and. As usual in Orthodoxy, that's one of the major little phrases you need to memorize and apply. It's both and, not either or. So during this period, we can discern three groups of Orthodox Christians that are becoming discernible. The Americanized descendants of early immigrants who spoke English firstly and mainly married their fellow Americans, right? The Americanized descendants of early immigrants. These are people who came over in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Now their children and grandchildren in the 90s are marrying, and they're still in the church. Unfortunately, many of them did not stay in the church. Many of those descendants did not stay in the church, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons: lack of catechism, variety of reasons, lack of missionary mindedness, et cetera, et cetera. But you have that group, Americanized descendants of early immigrants. Then you have the new immigrants, right? The new immigrants of the 90s, especially 2000s, who are coming over after the fall of the Soviet Union, especially, and just fleeing to the West for a variety of reasons, mostly economic. And those new immigrants, they spoke their mother tongue and they congregated with their fellows from back home. They wanted to maintain their identity, and who can blame them in the great melting pot of America? And then you had the indigenous, so-called Native American converts. We're natives here. Who may have grown up in the church as children of converts, right? So you have that group as well. So it is ironic and tragic that the first group, the Americanized descendants of early immigrants, are the ones who've struggled the most to remain faithful and within the church. They often lack the rootedness of the recent immigrant and the zeal of the convert. And their experience of Orthodoxy is undermined by a very secularized American way of life. In my experience, the so-called ethnic old country, very, Greeky Greek, as they say, or Romanian, they are more in tune and akin in spirit to the converts than they are to the Americanized descendants who are impacted greatly by secularization. You can see this in great relief in something like the Fordham academic milieu, which is like a UFO to old country, simple Orthodox from the village, and equally distasteful their agendas and their strivings to the convert. What people like, what's her name, Sarah Riccardi Schwartz, am I getting her name right? What people like her who are on a mission, right? They're on a quest, self-appointed, to rid the church of whatever they think is the enemy, mostly zealous converts and anybody who likes the czar or something. But whatever the case is, these kind of folks, what they don't get is that the old country and the new country, the old Orthodox and the new converts, have little interest in their agenda. They're actually a very strange entity in the church. Nobody really can identify with them. They think they are a kind of an intellectual superiority to the rest of us, and we're all kind of dumb and foolish and bumbling and bigots or racist or whatever it is that they like to imagine. And they have little time for the old country immigrant and for the new convert. But actually, these two groups are more akin, more alike, and more committed to traditional Orthodoxy than to the secularized, collar-wearing, Let's be accepted by the big boys, the heterodox. This whole mentality is very, very unfortunate, and yet it exists. They have struggled the most to remain in the church and to be faithful to the church. So, as converts, do not run to jettison in the least the ethnic so-called Orthodox from the old country, the old world, who are traditional minded and simple and pious and all the rest. We need them desperately. One of the greatest problems for the convert in America is obtaining the Orthodox ethos. It cannot be obtained. It cannot be obtained without experience and examples. So you cut off yourself from that deepening of the ethos when you walk away from the so-called ethnic Orthodox or ethnic parishes. So this brings us to the last stage. The post-COVID period, the last 5 years, which have seen unprecedented numbers of converts, inquirers, catechumens, sometimes 5 or 10 times more than pre-COVID numbers. And this surge is due to a number of converging factors, including a post-COVID awakening to the spiritual realm and reality among totally alienated and secularized or politically radicalized groups of society who are waking up to the underlying spiritual realm and reality and then seeking out and finding their path to orthodoxy. Also, a contributing factor is the spike in online presenters, the presence of the Orthodox. Hugely important and a great missionary tool, which was, has brought Orthodoxy to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that have never heard of it, understood it, and is making it more and more approachable, applicable, and accessible. Also, the reaching of what I call a critical mass of personal word-of-mouth witnesses, right? Your friends, your cousins, your uncles, your brothers, sisters, mothers, or whatever it might be, right? They've gone to an Orthodox church, and you're hearing about it now through the grapevine, through the various relationships you've had, and that is hugely impactful, more than I would say the other two that I mentioned. And then finally, Western heterodoxy is imploding. Western heterodoxy is imploding and disintegrating at a rapid pace. Can we not put the SSPX excommunications as one more of the pendulum swings of the West, right? I've talked about this a lot, how the whole of the Western history from the departure of the Pope in the 11th century all the way down to our days is a history of a pendulum swing that never can find the royal path, can never find the middle way, can come to a balanced, deep, royal path Christian experience. It's always one extreme to another. It's an endless wrecking ball of holy tradition. And so the SSPX is just the latest of a reaction to the action of Vatican II, which was in many ways a reaction to the previous Vatican II kind of hyper ultramontane super conservatism. It was boiling underneath the surface for decades and centuries. They understood that they had gone too far with Vatican I to the right, and now they're coming back to the left, and now SSPX is coming back to the right, and just it's an endless pendulum swing, no balance. And that is a sign of the absence of the Spirit of God. That is one of the signs, right? Orthodoxy has people who depart left and right. Of course, people are free. They can become flaming liberals or hard-headed conservatives or whatever it might be that they choose instead of the high path of the fathers, the royal path of the fathers. But as the Orthodox Church, the life of the church, the royal path is there for anyone who wants to walk it. And there are not these massive swings from one extreme to another. So this is the reality on the ground, is that Western heterodoxy is imploding in real time. We're seeing people fleeing the sinking ships of all these different congregations who have adopted all kinds of insane teachings, created splinter groups in the Anglican, traditional Anglicans, the Episcopal Church, breaking again and again. Every decade, there's a new schism in the Anglicanism. It's an endless array of disintegration. And it's going to, I think, continue to speed up in many ways. We have, as I said earlier tonight, we saw jurisdictional political divisions because of the political ideologies that had come in many ways. They had come and imposed themselves and obliterated the church, for instance, the Soviet Union, and caused tremendous hardship on the Orthodox Church. But they've been reconciled. They've been resolved in many ways. Like I said, the Serbian church, even the Syrian, the Antiochian church for a time, the Russian church, even they've had those divisions be healed, right? We're healing them in most cases, right? There's still more to do, more work to do. And I think still there will be great healing. I'm not a prophet. I'm talking about what the saints have said. We are going to see in our lifetime an ecumenical council, an Orthodox ecumenical council, not the false council of Crete, not the tragic documents that were produced there, which were absolutely under the influence of an ecumenistic, worldly spirit in many ways. No, we're going to see a truly Orthodox council that's going to put an end to many more problems and divisions, according to the prophecies of the saints. In any case, we're not seeing the kind of disintegration and pendulum swinging from one extreme to another that you see in the West. We have those who unfortunately have fallen to the Western heterodox mentality, humanistic mentality, but they're on their way out. They're on their way out. They're not leading the faithful. The faithful are not listening to them. So we, in this post-COVID moment, this historical moment that we're in, as I said earlier, it's the most promising, the most problematic at the same time. Why? Well, on the one hand, it's the most promising because we see the love of the true faith, once delivered, is spreading like wildfire, like fire amongst the rubble of a spiritual wasteland. And it's resulting in a kind of seeding, a great reseeding of neophytes in the church. So there's going to be great fruit from all these converts and families and children that are coming into Orthodoxy. Hopefully, if they can go deep, they're properly initiated, properly baptized, properly catechized, and fed on traditional Orthodoxy, then we have great things to expect. If not, if we're getting sucked into the whirlpool of ecumenism, well, then this will be for naught. But God willing, we'll see great fruit. We're seeing it already. But with this tremendous fire of zeal for the true faith once delivered, the responsibility of the catechist increases tremendously, as does the risk of an inadequate purification and preparation before initiation. Let me repeat that. With all this growth comes tremendous responsibility on the part of the priest and the catechist. And the risk of inadequate, insufficient, poor purification and preparation for initiation rises, right? So if you had 5 converts 5 years ago, now you have 50, well, you have a tenfold increase, and the risk is tenfold, and the problems could be tenfold, depending on what we're doing and how we're becoming Orthodox. It's not guaranteed. The numbers never guarantee anything, right? Doesn't matter if there's a zillion people coming in. If they're not properly initiated, purified, repenting, oriented, it's a bigger disaster. So while not long ago, a typical parish might see, as I said, 5 or 10 catechumens every year, now we're seeing 50, 25, 50, 100, 200 in some parishes. So this massive increase is full of potential and full of possible problems. The mystagogues, that's the priests mainly, and the catechists, the mystagogues, those who initiate people into the mystery, if they do not form, purify, and prepare the converts to receive the grace of the mysteries and to, of course, the mystery of baptism first and foremost, then the fiery zeal will remain wild and not according to knowledge. The fiery zeal will remain wild and not according to knowledge. Do you not see that right now? That in some cases this is happening? They're not being humbled. They're not being purified. They're not being trained. They're not being initiated. And therefore, they remain as a wildfire that's not according to knowledge, on the right or the left, mainly on the right. The result may not only be the stunted growth of individuals, but maybe a diseased growth of heresy and schism. The immediate and distant future of the church is literally in the hands of today's priests and catechists, as never before, right? It's always been the case, but now you're talking numbers and impact and a cultural moment, historical moment, and the disintegration of heterodoxy. It just is it's a perfect storm that could go very well or could go very south, right? And I think that there's potential that both will happen, and we'll have all kinds of very unprecedented pastoral challenges in the years ahead. I wanted to talk, but these things always go longer than I usually account for. I want to talk about some of the saints and their examples. I'll do that. There was a third part. I want to get into Ameridoxy. What is Ameridoxy? We're going to talk about that in a minute. But a few words from the saints, and just for you who are newcomers or inquirers, you don't know much about Orthodox saints in America, I think it's good to be introduced. Then you can go further, read their lives, and go further, go deeper. It is, before I even get there, I want to say this, it's very important. It is a great comfort and a great source of inspiration for us that our founding, the beginning of the Orthodox mission in America, was from experiential theologians, monk missionaries from the northern Athos, as I mentioned, right? Balaam, the great Balaam monastery. Read up about Balaam. We just celebrated on the new calendar, just coming up on the church calendar in a week or so, the feast of Saints Sergius and Germanos, the founders of Balaam Monastery. These are some of the great ascetics, akin to the great monastics on Mount Athos, but in northern Russia. They came over, 8 of them, St. Herman included, traveled immense distances, great hardship, to come and to missionize and teach and preach and love and protect those humble natives in Alaska that was still under the Russian Empire. But they were experiential theologians. That's how it all began. And now, in the last 30 years, 40 years, we have another group of experiential theologians from the original Athos, the holy mountain of Athos, that have come over in our day and have become great teachers of the faith. All the monasteries, of course, under Elder Ephraim. Now, some of you are English-speaking converts and really just oriented toward anything that's English-speaking. I want to encourage you, no matter the linguistic barrier or even the distance, go and spend time and visit the monasteries. If you understand what the monasteries mean, the significance of the ascetics, the monastics, you will run to the monasteries. It's our ignorance that keeps us passive and inactive in this sense, right? That keeps us kind of tied down to what is easy and accessible and immediate, right? We have to understand the significance of the monastic in our place. It's so important. Orthodoxy is ascetic. The heart of Orthodoxy are the monasteries, always have been from the beginning. The monastic ascetic struggle. St. John the Baptist in the desert. Prophet Elias in the Old Testament. All the early great ascetics that defended Orthodoxy and taught Orthodoxy by example. St. Anthony the Great. And on throughout church history. All the great confessors of the faith. So many who fought the great heresies were from the monasteries. So many of the greatest bishops were from the monasteries. You cannot understand Orthodoxy without the monasteries. Flee to the monasteries from the worldly spirit and understand these great ascetics from Athos and their children and grandchildren now that are living in the monasteries. It's a great significance for the church. It's hard to underestimate the significance of the church of the monasteries. So these hermits, one-time hermits, Elder Ephrem was a hermit. He was in a small little cell on the side of the mountain of Athos in St. Anne Skeet, little St. Anne Skeet. These hermits have been made missionaries by God, and they are truly our perennial spiritual North Stars. You know, St. Herman was called North Star of Christ Church in America. Well, all of these great ascetics are our North Stars. So let's talk a little bit about some of the saints, and then we'll open it up. No, we'll talk about Ameridoxy a bit, and then we'll open it up for questions. As I said earlier, these great ascetics from Valam, it's hard to imagine the sacrifice, right? They came over, this is just about 7 years after the U.S. Constitution in Philadelphia was drafted. 7 years later, 1787, 8 monks, 7,300-mile journey by foot and by, I'm assuming, some kind of carriage or something. 293 days. 293 days of travel by, not by mechanized, but by foot or by animal, across land and sea. They arrived in Kodiak Island, bringing Orthodoxy to Alaska. So that's how it all began. It's good to remember that and be thankful to God for those ascetics and their sacrifice. Not long after their arrival, even though they had great success in the mission field, St. Juvenali, one of the higher monks, was the first martyr in North America. And he had already converted over 700 natives in the place where he was doing his mission. And it's very interesting how he died. He died in a miraculous way. His witness is a miraculous witness. The natives, it says, told St. Innocent of Alaska, who came after him a few years, that after they had killed St. Juvenali, after they had killed him, he arose and followed them, urging them to repent. And they fell upon him again and gave him a savage beating. Once more, he arose to his feet and called them again to repentance. This happened several times until finally they hacked him to pieces. This is kind of a metaphor, kind of an image of Orthodoxy in America. We're getting beat down, Orthodoxy throughout church history, getting beaten down again and again, only to rise and call the world to repentance again and again. Right? That's the role of the prophetic voices of the missionary monk ascetics throughout the ages. About a decade later, after the martyrdom of St. Juvenali, St. Herman was nearly left alone, and he retreats to Spruce Island in Kodiak Island. If go look at the map, it's an amazing place. I've been looking at it in preparation of this lecture, and really would like to go and visit after reading up again and again. I've read it years ago, kind of read it again, but I had to go and see that. I had to go visit, be there on Spruce Island. But he went to Spruce Island, a little island off of Kodiak, which he renamed Nuvalam. And there he lived the hesychastic life, the perennial ascetic hesychastic life from the beginning of the ascetics. He lived in a small cell dug out of the earth, covered with sod before he built his own wooden cabin. He had one simple monastic cassock that he wore year-round. Underneath it, and his deerskin smock, he had a heavy iron cross that he wore. Chains fastened the cross across his chest directly against his body. His rest, his sleep, he took on a wooden bench, and he used a thin deerskin for a blanket and a brick for a pillow. Okay, again, everywhere you look in Orthodoxy, you find ascetics, strugglers. St. John slept in a chair a few hours each night. St. Herman on a bench and a brick for a pillow. This is what it means, all for the love of Christ. This is what it means to be an Orthodox Christian, to pick up your cross and to live a daily crucifixion. St. Herman maintained the monastic fast, of course. He ate what he could from his large garden plot. It included potatoes and cabbage and vegetables and mushrooms and berries. And he got salt from the ocean. And this was a very, very simple ascetic life on this island. And of course, there were natives there that he was taking care of on the island, still are. And in spite of him being emaciated from his asceticism, he is said to have tremendous human strength so that he could carry these massive objects long distances that other people could not barely have lifted. He was walking, it says, once through the snow barefoot in the dead of winter, carrying a log that would normally require 4 grown men to lift. His example, his legacy was not only to his own disciples or only to his own personal struggle, but to his neighbor and his love of his pastoral care of all of the natives and their children. He stood up against the exploitation of the natives by the Russian businessmen. And he was there to nurse the sick and all the rest that you would expect from a lover of Christ. He built a chapel, a guest house, an orphanage, and in many, many other ways, his holiness was manifest. And of course, he was glorified in 1970 by the Russian church because of it. He said once to a bunch of gentlemen, quote unquote, from Russia, he said, "I, a sinner, have been trying to love God for more than 40 years and cannot say that I perfectly love him. If we love someone, we always remember him and try to please him day and night. Our heart is occupied with that object." How true that is. If we love. Do you love? Do you love, really? Just examine that. Do you do that? I can't say I love anything if that's the standard, except myself, maybe. God help us. Far from the standard of St. Herman here. He says to the gentleman, "Is that how you love God? Do you often turn to him? Do you always remember him? Do you always pray to him, fulfill his holy commandments? Do you? For our good, for our happiness at least, let us make a vow that from this day, from this hour, from this minute, we shall strive to love God above all else and to fulfill his holy will." Well known, but very important message from St. Herman. In St. Herman's lifetime, we have the first martyr from the native tribe, Peter the Aleut. He was with the Russian-American company. He was down near Los Angeles, near San Pedro, and he was pressured to convert to papal Protestantism by Franciscans who were there with the Spanish. And even though they pled again and again, we're Christians. We were baptized. We're Orthodox Christians. They said, no, you're not. You're heretics and you're schismatics. You have to become papists. They tortured them. Eventually, Peter was the only one that was severely tortured. They cut off his joints, his feet, his hands until the blood flowed, and he died. He was the only one to die. Then after that happened, they were reprimanded or called to account, or something happened there where they stopped. And when St. Herman learned of it, he made the sign of the cross, and he said, "Holy new martyr Peter, pray to God for us." St. Peter the Aleut, first martyr from the natives. St. Innocent of Alaska arrived in 1824. He was the great missionary, future patriarch of Moscow. He's a great example in many ways for all of us who seek to be missionaries today in America. He was an amazing author, a linguist, a scholar, a pastor, a translator. He was extremely well educated for his time. He had a great desire to see all things redeemed, language, culture, and the whole of creation within the Church of Christ. He labored greatly, and his approach is a model for us today. He broke down the barriers to share the gospel by mastering 6 dialects. He learned 6 dialects of the natives. He built bridges of communication by developing the first written alphabet of the Unangan language. Rather than oppose Russian culture, he sought to affirm wherever possible existing moral truths of native culture. He freed his neophytes from ignorance by translating the Gospel of Matthew, prayers, and catechism. He took them by the hand and initiated them into the meaning and method of living in eternity now, when he wrote his great catechism, indication of the way into the kingdom of heaven, translated into many, many languages today. So he was a great missionary. And although he came to leave his bones among the natives, he eventually was called back in 1867. And then in 1879, he was called to heaven. He became the patriarch of Moscow, the metropolitan of Moscow. And he was venerated as a great churchman and then eventually a great saint in America. We also have, and I'll be stopped here, even though I could go on. We could talk about many, many saints, right? We have St. Tikhon, of course. We have St. Raphael of Brooklyn we could talk about. We have St. Mardario, St. Nikolai Velimirovich, St. John of Shanghai, as we said, Father Seraphim, all the way up into Elder Ephraim in our own day. But I'm just going to stop after this, and I'm talking about Ameridoxy in a minute. But I want to talk about somebody maybe you don't know about, higher monk Sebastian Dabovic. I don't know. I'm butchering it. He was a Serbian, born in San Francisco, believe it or not. Born in San Francisco to Serbian parents. He founded the first Serbian Orthodox parish in America in Jackson, California. It was consecrated in 1894. He was a selfless missionary. He loved and lived a voluntary poverty, and he was dedicated to Orthodoxy to a great the confession of the Holy Orthodox faith in a great way. He was called the greatest Serbian missionary in modern times by St. Nikolai Velimirovich. He baptized and preached all over the United States. He was instrumental in establishing Orthodox parishes in California, Oregon, Washington, Montana, Arizona, and Illinois. He had a wider ministry which stretched from the Aleutian Peninsula of Alaska to Russia to Japan. He went to Japan on a missionary work. He went to the small Balkan towns on the coast of the Black and Adriatic Seas. He's said to have baptized more people than anyone else in the Western Hemisphere in terms of the missionary endeavors of all the missionaries for the last 250 years. He was supported materially by Nikolai Tesla. A lot of people don't know that Nikolai Tesla was a faithful Serbian Orthodox, and he supported Father Saint Sebastian in his missionary work. He served the Serbs in Chicago, and he was teaching at the First Orthodox Seminary in New Jersey, and eventually he went and served his people during World War I as a chaplain. St. Nikolai says of him, Archbishop Tikhon, St. Tikhon, was eager to show his appreciation to St. Sebastian for all his wonderful work. Once, when he celebrated Holy Liturgy in the Serbian church in Chicago, St. Tikhon presented the archimandrite with a precious mitre. It was worth 1,000 rubles in gold. But Father Sebastian quickly sold that precious gift, gave the money to the church to pay off the debts. This was the kind of man he was. He was a absolutely unselfish, virtuous worker in the vineyard of the Lord. St. Nikolai said of him later on, after meeting with him in 1921, he said, his poverty amazed me. when I met him. I invited him to lunch, blushing. He said, "Thank you. I just bought a roll of bread with my last 5 cents." He had no salary. He lived on donations, whatever they gave him, he lived on that. And even though he had empty pockets, he was planning always his next great missionary journey to Alaska, to Japan, and of course, to Europe. So he was a great missionary and a great example for us today. He published divine services and catechisms, lives of saints, and sermons in English. He was an English-speaking missionary in the early 1920s, 1910s and 20s. We can go on. We can talk about St. Alexis Toth and the 20 to 25,000 Uniate converts that he brought into the faith by the time of his death in 1909. We can talk about St. Tikhon, the great patriarch of Moscow, who did tremendous missionary work all over the United States. He went for about a 5-year period, 6 months out of the year, he was traveling to all the different places around the United States by train, by boat, by horse-drawn carriage. He had, as his co-worker, St. Raphael of Brooklyn, great zeal for the upbuilding of the church in North America, a great teacher of the faith. We have published 4 small booklets by St. Raphael on Come Out and Press if you want to learn and read more of his wisdom. Very prolific, pioneer in publishing work in the United States. He founded the Word magazine, translating, printing, distributing essential Greek liturgical books in Arabic for all of the Arabic-speaking Orthodox in North America at the time. And we could go on and on about the saints of North America, but we're going to stop. We're going to say some words about the so-called Ameridoxy. So I want to start by, first of all, defining what I mean by Ameridoxy and why it's a problem. And then I want to do a poll. So I told you early on we're going to do a poll. So I'll put the poll up here in a minute, but I want you all to vote in the poll and give me a sense of how present is Ameridoxy in your parish. And so let's define the term. What I'm calling Ameridoxy is the following idea. To a degree which is false. Like there's always truth in everything, right? There's a truth in many things, I should say. And there's truth in this too. American Orthodoxy, right? We need to establish American Orthodoxy. We need to have a church in America for the local population in English. Yes. We just talked about the saints and how they did this for hundreds of years now. However, going from that to what I'm calling Ameridoxy is a fall and a jump, which we must not take. What is Ameridoxy? It is the idea that we can dumb down, water down, oversimplify, create on our own an orthodoxy, all in the name of an indigenous implantation of the faith. So we don't just change certain externals like language or whatever it might be that's culturally attached to the old world. No, we go beyond that and say, well, in the old world, they say this about this sin or this practice or this fasting, but in America, we do X. We are an American Orthodox. We have a different way of doing, and then we'd say very basic things that the church has always done. We change them because that's part of our enculturization or indigenization of Orthodoxy. And so we have these kind of justifications for an Ameridoxy, right? That's what I'm calling it. It's Ameridoxy. It's not Orthodoxy, and it's not American Orthodoxy. It's a transmutation, a transformation, a distortion of Orthodoxy, all in the name of supposedly making it applicable, bringing it down to a level that the American can handle. And that this is a distortion and a change on the level of the ascetic life mainly. That's where the problem, right? We're too ascetic. So you have people saying, well, in America, we don't fast from oil on Wednesdays and Fridays. In America, we do this. We don't fast from, during these fast periods. We do X. Or, our services, we don't do I'm just giving you some examples, and you can tell me examples of the Ameridoxy. And so of course, there are innovations in the old world, right? There are innovations, maybe they're the same innovations that some people have incorporated in America, but they justify these innovations, these changes on the basis, again, third time, we have to make it applicable, accessible, easy for the quote unquote American population because, they can't do that, or that's not something that's important. This is secondary. And then they talk about a big T and a small t tradition, which has some utility to it, but then they take it too far. This is a small t tradition. This isn't significant. This doesn't matter. Yeah, but when you do that, you're not humbly accepting and following what's been handed down. Now you're picking and choosing. That sounds not very Orthodox to me. We follow the Holy Fathers and we accept what's been handed down to us. We don't innovate in Orthodoxy. So yes, there'll be let's say, transition to a certain degree into the indigenous culture. Yes, but it must be slight and not affecting any essentials, any basic ascetic way of life of the church. So I want to hear from you and the ways that you see transmutation happening to an Ameridoxy, which is essentially a secularized, worldly version of Orthodoxy, justified on the basis of, we're in America. We do things differently here. One of the things that comes to mind is the idea that the priest shouldn't wear his cassock in America. We should have collars. We should have collars like the papists. This was taught by hierarchs. This is still taught by at least one hierarch that I've heard stories repeatedly of this hierarch going and telling people the priests shouldn't wear cassocks, they should wear collars. Why? What is that? How could that possibly be justified? Why would we don clerical garb of heretics? Why do we want to be identified with heresy? When millions of people are fleeing the sinking boat of heterodoxy, we're going to go and identify with that? That's going to be a missionary outreach? That's going to be good for us on a missionary setting? Do you know how many people draw close to the priest who has his cassock and ask what are you? Where are you from? Tell me about this. And it's totally new for them. And so you have a totally new opportunity to tell them, this is Orthodoxy. We're not what you think. This is Christianity you've never experienced. Let's start from scratch. They need that more than anything. So the collar is a very great example of Ameridoxy, right? We're going to become like the Americans, whatever that means. And another great example, which is almost comical if it's not so tragic. There was a older Greek man in Los Angeles, and he had a younger, children, like 20, 30, 40 years younger than him. And his parish was Greek, right? So the kids said, I don't understand Greek. You never taught me Greek. I married now this American lady. She's a Protestant. We're going to go to the Protestant churches. And the old Greek man said, yeah, my son, he goes to the American church. What do you mean he goes to the American church? He goes to the English-speaking American church. You mean the Protestant church? Yeah, he goes to that church. That's the American church. So now you have this idea of Ameridoxy, of just this distortion of our perception of the church and this is the other extreme, right? And this ethnophilatism that is content with apostasy because they view it only Orthodoxy in the question of a cultural, linguistic identity. It's all about this world and our identity in this world. No, it's not. Orthodoxy is about the next world and preparing for it and entering into it now. And therefore, all those lower things on the hierarchy that can and do change, they must change for the sake of the higher things, which is the life eternal. And so you have various reactions, actions, and a distortion. So let's make Orthodoxy applicable to the heterodox or accessible, or let's water it down in variety of ways into a kind of new version of Orthodoxy, what I'm calling Ameridoxy. So here's the poll. You see it on the screen, I hope. If you're on a phone, you may not see this because it's on the left corner on your screen. But it says, to what degree do you think your parish is committed to a Ameridoxy as defined here? What degree do you think your parish is committed to an Ameridoxy, right? A distortion, a watering down, and a dumbing down of Orthodoxy, easy, broad, no ascetic struggle. We don't fast. We don't pray much. We don't do the 40 times. We just do 10, or, everything's easy, comfortable. We got to make it easy for people, right? That's a big part of Ameridoxy. So is it totally committed? Put 1. Hit the number 1 in the chat if it's a totally committed Ameridoxy. Hit the number 2 if it's largely influenced by Ameridoxy. Hit number 3 if it's some influence but waning. Some influence but waning. Like there is an Ameridoxy segment, but it's waning. It's not that strong. And then hit number 4 if it's barely noticeable. Not interested, doesn't exist. We're not doing it here. We're perennial, diachronic, same yesterday, today, and forever. Orthodoxy always was, is, and will ever be. Doesn't matter if we're in America. This is Orthodoxy. Yeah, it's in English. Yeah, we're chanting in English, but it's the same Orthodoxy as we received, and it's never going to change. That's number 4. All right. So 4 is immutable, barely noticeable, 0 to 20%. And then it gets worse as you go to 3, 2, 1. 1's like, Lord have mercy. We have departed into the realm of Ameridoxy, right? And we got serious problems because it's just the criteria is dumbed down, easy, secularized. So I'd love to see your contributions here. You got to be on YouTube or Facebook, I believe, to take part in this poll. Everybody so far that I can see who's doing it is on YouTube or Facebook. So if you're over on X, and there's hundreds of you over there right now watching me, jump over to our live stream on YouTube and vote. Then you can go back to X. Jump over here and put 1, 2, 3, or 4. Right? 1 is totally committed to Ameridoxy. 4 is barely noticeable. Barely noticeable, number 4. We're doing all right. We don't have Ameridoxy going on in our so that's not American Orthodoxy. Our saints are committed to an indigenous English-speaking Orthodox church. Obviously, we've talked about that for the last hour. No, this is a distortion. This is a perversion. This is a dumbing down of Orthodoxy. All right, let's talk about all this and more in our question and answer session. You can submit your questions with all caps question, and you can submit your, what are they called, super chats. Support the work if you want, and that'll get those will get answered first. But I would love to hear your questions on anything. We can talk about SSPX. I've got a bunch of posts on X, if you're on X, about the SSPX reality. A lot of people don't know what is that. What is that all that about? SSPX and hardcore Latinizer or Latin masters. We could talk about. I don't know, whatever you want. What's going on right now in Orthodoxy? What's your questions? Bring them on right now over here. If you're on, I believe on X, you can submit questions. Why doesn't somebody right now on X submit a question? Let's see if we get this coming through our StreamYard interface here. Love to see a question from the folks over on X and just confirm that you can ask a question, because it's rare that I see people asking questions from over in that part of the internet here that's watching. You don't see the poll. So the poll is on the screen, but you're maybe on a phone. Are you on a phone that you don't see the poll? But you don't need to see the poll. All you need to do is answer the poll, right? If you want to participate in the poll, let me just say quickly, listen carefully. If your parish is totally committed to a Ameridoxy, a watering down, so-called enculturation to the point of a distortion of Orthodoxy. If your parish is committed to an Ameridoxy, you have problems in secularization, dumbing down, nobody's fasting, it's easy, it's comfortable. That's number 1. Hit number 1, johnmarion.com. If your parish is at the other extreme, in the good sense, I would say, barely noticeable. There is no Ameridoxy in our parish. It's the same yesterday, today, and forever. We're not trying to water down or dumb down Orthodoxy. That's number 4. And then 2 and 3 are the in between, right? 70% to 30%. So we're 1 to 4, 1 being the worst, 4 being the best. Let's hear what you have to say. And you can just hit the number 1, 2, 3, or 4 to participate in. But you can't put multiple things in your comment for it to be registered in the poll. Just the number 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right. I want to see, after all that, johnmarion.com. What's your vote? Former SSPV, St. Pius the 5th, not the 10th, right? So that's, you can tell us what that is. Why don't you explain? 4. All right, johnmarion.com. You are in a parish that is not severely impacted or at all impacted by Ameridoxy. And that's a good thing. I like to see that. In fact, right now, I don't know if you can see the percentages, over 56% of you have said barely noticeable. Ameridoxy is barely noticeable. And 33% say it's some influence, but it's waning. And only 11% are in the, yeah, we got a problem with Ameridoxy. And that's good to hear. I think, though, it's a little tilted because the people who watch us probably are not interested in Ameridoxy very much, right? So we already got a kind of a tilted toward anti-Ameridoxy. All right, we're going to start with the questions. I'm tagging the questions because I guess our moderator is busy. I want to make sure I don't want to miss your questions. Why don't you tell us, John Marion? There we go. What is SSPV for those who don't know? SSPV. Oh no, stars for fan 4. You hit 1 instead of 4. Now we've skewed the whole thing. No, I'm joking. Okay, we're waiting for John Marion to tell us what is SSPV, unless I missed it. Did he tell us? We're going to start with the questions and then we'll come back. Any question is welcomed. SSPX, SSPV, or whatever is on your mind. And Connor Walkinson will answer that question as well if you asked it. Let me see where it's at. I don't see it. There it is. Make sure. Is it a question, or are you just stating something because it's not showing up as a question? All right. We'll tag it as a question. We'll get to it. All right. Let's start with Matthew Jenkins, always in the house. Matthew, considering what many of the saints have said about ordination in the priesthood, why did the many priests, saints, and holy people not refuse ordination? That's an interesting question. Well, obviously, I can only speculate, right? I can only speculate. There is the will of God. There is obedience, right? And there's not a ton of saints that are saying, I refuse ordination. It's kind of rare. St. Paisios was one of them. And I think that St. Paisios himself sensed deeply, even though people wanted him to be ordained, he sensed deeply, he understood that God's will was he not be ordained. And that was how he was going to serve the church. So ultimately, it's about the will of God. And being obedient is more important than avoiding the great and fearful mystery of ordination. Right? So these great saints you're talking about, they were obedient. They were obedient, and they had either signs or they had great saints who were telling them this is what you need to do, and they understood that that was the path forward. I don't think there's some bigger question there or bigger answer that is pretty straightforward. Backwoods Barbarian Daniel, gifting 10 memberships. God bless you, Backwoods. Father, it is sad. Thank you for the donation, Mr. Alfresenik. Cerneric. I don't know how to say it. Father, it is sad. Some Orthodox trust the Masoretic text. Divine preservation of Scripture does not apply to heretics. But I'm grateful St. Paisius believed in the Septuagint and the ancient Greek is the main holy language. Well, it's not even a question of, holy language or unholy language. It's a question of what the church did from the beginning. I mean, and who actually translated the Septuagint. They were faithful before Christ, and they were the text was accepted and embraced and used by the church from the beginning. So it's a done deal. It's done. Like, I don't get where anybody in Orthodoxy could say, "Oh, let's change over to the Masoretic," even if it was written by holy people who were not antichrist, like the ones who actually put it together, which rejected Christ. They were Talmudist. They are not trustworthy. So even if that was not the case, we already had the text, and that is used in Scripture, used by the early church. It's very bizarre that I don't know. I never heard a good defense of why the Orthodox should use the Masoretic text. So I'm still waiting. If you could please DM me, I need the info on immigration of several jurisdictions that migrated to North Carolina. Is that what that is? In the 1800s, immigration of several jurisdictions that migrated to, I can only think that's North Carolina, in the 1800s and 1900s. Okay, I don't have that. I'm not a great source on history per se. I went and found others who had these sources, and I'm quoting them. But I would suggest you go to orthodoxhistory.org. Matthew Namey, who's probably the most well-versed in all of these interesting historical developments. That would be my suggestion. I'm not going to be able to help you more than he's going to be able to help you the most. So go over to orthodoxhistory.org and Matthew Namey. Question, Father Peter, dear Father Peter, please make a podcast about pride, the faces of pride and all the huge problems resulting from pride. This vice is really a killer of the truth. Thank you. That's interesting. Thank you for the suggestion. We'll check it out. Father Bless, will you be at St. Joseph's for the feast day? I'm assuming you mean at the Monastery of St. Anthony's. I believe I will be, yes. I don't have any plans to not be here. So, God willing, unless you're talking about St. Joseph's in Texas, where Father Justin is first year of celebrating the feast on the 29th of August, I could possibly attend that. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. That's hard because it's a Saturday. It's the Feast of St. John the Baptist on the new calendar, and I have to be back by Saturday night. So it would be pretty rough for me to go to that and get back all the way here in Arizona. So we'll see about that. Father Bless, traveling now to Holy Archangel's Monastery in Candela, Texas. Do you personally know any of the fathers there? Thanks. Yeah, of course. I know all the fathers. Been there going back 20 years. Great place. Father Peter, I'm afraid of pain, but not afraid to die. We know the saints weren't afraid to die for Christ, but do we know if they overcame the fear of pain? And is that possible for us? I don't think the human person generally can just normally, physically, naturally overcome the fear of pain without the grace of God, the Holy Spirit, and really a divine support. And I think all the great martyrs obviously had that grace, had that support, had that intervention of God to allow them to stand fearlessly before tremendous tortures and to endure the tortures and not to succumb to physical, to be physically overcome. No one without God, without Christ, without his grace can sustain and withstand all that. So the question is not, will you cease to be human? But by the grace of God, will you overcome that? And by the grace of God, withstand not only the fear, but the actual torture. and only in God. So I think everything is on God. You trust God, you put all your hope there, and only by calling on him and waiting on him and expecting his help and his support can you endure those things, those tortures. Considering what many of the saints have said about ordination, I think I've already answered that. Sorry, we already did that. Let's keep going. Dear Father, the pestilence of the Enlightenment Creole, does that mean creed? I don't know. Also into the Russian Empire. Yes. Are there Russian saints who wrote about that, similar to St. Athanasius, or is his work unique? Thank you. I don't read Russian, so I don't know. I'm sure there's literature in Russian. St. Hilarion Trotsky would certainly be somebody I would run to and see in his writings a very big pushback against a lot of the themes that come out of the 19th century heterodox West. But I don't know if he's specifically talking about fraternity, equality, and the French Revolution principles. I'm trying to think, I don't know for sure, but I would guess if there were saints who wrote specifically in response, like St. Raphael of Brooklyn, who has a particular essay on it, or St. Athanasius, it would be St. Theophan or St. Ignati. Those are the two saints that come to mind. I would think St. John of Kronstadt would have comments. He doesn't have a treatise on it, but he would have comments about all of that that's creeping in. I mean, they might not have gone specifically and philosophically tried to undermine it, but there's certainly going to be a lot of pushback to the spirit and the mentality that's coming over from Europe. Father, how can the Orthodox Church be the one true church if it hasn't at least tried to evangelize the whole world like the Latins? And Father, forgive me for saying this, you guys don't care. We don't care? Really? That's a lot of hubris on your part. Like, where do you get off saying that? How do you know what we care about and what we don't? But beyond that, I'm happy to answer your question. The Orthodox Church has done tremendous evangelization. You are perhaps ignorant of that, and I'm happy to educate you. There's a book, for instance, written all about Russian missions in the 19th century. Tremendous, extensive, effective missionary work throughout the whole of the Russian Empire, into China and Japan, and all the way into America. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, you had St. Stephen of Perm, you had, of course, St. Innocent of Alaska, you had St. Herman, you had St. Nikolai of Japan, you had the missionaries that went down eventually into China. You have all kinds of missionaries among the Tartars. So the Russian church, for example, which was the church that was free, I remind you, for 400 plus years, all the way up to today, really, the Orthodox in the Middle East and in Asia Minor were under the Ottomans, right? They were under the persecution of the Muslims. So what exactly do you expect from a church has so many martyrs and is persecuted in so many ways, right? You might, in your imagination, think that this is some kind of punishment by God or some kind of, divine retribution or something, or I don't know what, but that's irrelevant to our discussion right now. The church that was free and able was tremendously successful in mission to those areas that they were able to missionize. So that's number one. Number two, we have great missionaries in the 20th century. All over the world, and especially in Africa. Right now, there's a robust and amazing mission throughout the entirety of the African continent, but you're ignorant of that, and I don't blame you. Why would you know? And there's one book you can read, and I highly recommend it. It's called Apostle of Zaire, The Life and Legacy of Father Cosmas of Grigoriou, and that's published by Uncut Mountain Press. You can go to Uncut Mountain Press, uncutmountainpress.com, and you can buy that great life of a great contemporary missionary. He went to the Congo, the heart of Africa, in the 1970s and 80s, and he baptized over 10,000 Orthodox Christians. Today, there's, 30, 40, 50,000 now. I'm not sure where they're at in terms of the church's size throughout the Congo or throughout Zaire. And there's a huge missionary effort all throughout Africa, as I said. And we have missionary journals in the Greek language. We have huge missionary drives throughout Greece to support them economically. I myself traveled to Mauritius, the island off of Madagascar, where there was a mission established by the ever memorable Bishop Nectarios of Madagascar, who himself baptized 10,000 or 12,000, if I'm not mistaken, but certainly thousands of Madagascarinese in a very short time. He was killed in a helicopter accident off of Mount Athos in 2003, I believe. So he was just there for 15 years, 15 years, and he was tremendously successful. And there's 2 now dioceses in Madagascar, and there's a mission on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Sea. So there's missionary work going on all throughout the Indonesia and the Philippines, and all throughout the Far East. And in India, there's missionaries. And so I don't know, I don't blame you, but to assume the Orthodox missionary work, you should not assume you don't know. Secondly, so we have tried, and we do try, to say the least, all over the Orthodox world today. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say to you. Go read the book. Go read the book Russian Missions. You can probably find it as a used bookstore somewhere. It's a little yellow book. Talks all about the Russian missions in the Far East. And happy to follow up. If you have any other questions, let me know. Father Bless, thoughts on the new Appalachian Orthodox aesthetic that is emerging. They seem to be strained from the traditional Byzantine styles and scales. So that's interesting. Is that an Ameridoxy? That's kind of what you're asking in a way. Is that Ameridoxy? I don't think that's certainly not the worst of Ameridoxy. No, I don't think it's Ameridoxy. I think there's some room, but I personally am not inspired by it. I'm personally, on a personal level, I don't think it even approaches traditional Romaic or Byzantine chant, but it is, I think, a true attempt at redeeming and blessing and sanctifying. I just don't know how much you can really incorporate that into the liturgical life. If they were doing this outside of the liturgy, I would give 1,000% thumbs up. The minute they bring it into the liturgy, it's a little bit problematic in my mind. There's more implications, practical and pastoral implications. There is a particular spiritual and liturgical ethos of Orthodoxy. Can the Appalachian music really be at that level and maintain that devoutness and that prayerfulness? I think there would be some people in the old country who would doubt that. I'm thinking of my teachers or models in Greece that I'm on Athos. I think they would be very intrigued and kind of smile at it, but I don't think they would ever incorporate it in their liturgy. They would never see that as no. There's a long historical process for that to be incorporated into the church liturgical life. I don't think we can just jump to it, throw it in there, and we're good. There has to be a real vetting over a long time. But I applaud the desire to do that. I just don't know if it can go in the liturgy. I think it's raises some questions, and there'd be some pretty serious people who would probably be opposed. In my guess, I've never talked to them about it, but I would think they would be reticent. Did St. John of Shanghai ever say anything about how to receive converts into Orthodoxy? Not to my knowledge. And I've read a lot of St. John's writings and life. I've read both lives. I've read his, the literature that's available in English. I don't remember him ever writing on the question of reception. Of course, he did not receive St. Seraphim, Father Seraphim Rose. That is a big misconception. Bishop Tikhon received Father Seraphim Rose, and he was already received into the church before St. John came from France and took over after Bishop Tikhon. So do not repeat that often repeated error that St. John was the one who received him into the church. Question part 2 from Connor. It seems to me, Father, that you guys don't care about everybody else and whether or not, if they're in the church, you guys care more about knowledge. Forgive me, Father. Okay, we've already answered that. And I'm happy to hear another follow-up from you. But we did answer that, and I think it's hubris on your part. But, okay, I accept your question, but I've answered it. How are you doing today? I hope you and your family are well. Glory to God. I don't know if you're talking to me, but thanks for asking. Did St. John of Shanghai ever say anything about how to receive converts? We just answered that. And the practice at the time in the Russian church was definitely not triple immersion. But interestingly, 6 years after or 5 years after his repose, the entire Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia mandated baptism for all converts. So it's hard to imagine he would have been opposed to that if all his fellow bishops saw that as a very good pastoral and imperative in the mission field. Father, should I be worried if my church has accepted money from the Eli Lilly Corporation for funding catechism and church children's ministries? Are there spiritual consequences? I cannot answer that definitively because I've never done the research into the Eli Lilly Corporation. So let me just do a quick, 30-second. It's a medicine company. I don't know anything about it, so how am I supposed to know? I don't know. Possibly. It's hard to say. I don't know. I don't know who's, what they're doing, why they're doing it, who's behind it. I don't know. Possibly. You have to do some research. Father, should I be worried if my church, we just did that. Let's go to the next one. Why? Sometimes we get 2 questions, one after another, submitted twice, same question, 1 minute apart. I've already answered that too. I don't know why things get submitted twice. Should inquirers, catechumens partake in the blessed bread? Our church does this. I'm very new to this. Interesting that you asked. I actually have 6 catechumens, seven catechumens, and I wanted to get the right answer, let's say, on this. And I've always thought that that makes no sense to me. Why would they receive the andidoron? What you're talking about is the andidoron. Anditudoro is the Greek phrase, right? Instead of the gifts. That's what that means. Andidoron means instead of the gifts. So you don't commune, you receive the andidoron. Can the catechumens commune? No. Therefore, they wouldn't receive the andidoron because they can't commune. It goes together with communion. It's when those who can don't. But since they can't, why would they receive it? That's my understanding. So the traditional answer is no. They do not receive the andidoron. We do not give it out to non-Orthodox who either communed or cannot commune, right? So traditionally speaking, there is something called, what the Russians call zapivka, or bread and wine and watered down wine, that those who commune take afterwards to wash down the Holy Communion. So you'll see that in Russian churches, a little table with a little glasses and a pitcher of watered down wine, and then little tiny pieces of bread. And they who commune go there and they consume that in order to wash down the communion. That's exactly what the priest does, by the way, in the altar. That's an ancient tradition. So in many places, in many Greek parishes, that does not happen. So they take the andidoron even though they communed, which is really not proper, but they do it all over the place because they're lazy or they don't want to do zapivka, or they never learned the zapivka, so-called zapivka. So the proper practice is that, and then the people who did not commune receive the andidoron. And therefore, it's only for those who do not receive, and so the catechumens would not be they wouldn't even be in the church, really, because they would be technically, or according to the exactitude, it would be proper for the catechumens to depart after the gospel and after the homily, right, and go to a place to be catechized. So the catechumens, in that case, according to exactitude, they wouldn't even be in the church at the end anyway. But I know many places don't do that. So you might be in a parish as a catechumen which do not have you depart, or maybe they have you depart, but you come back at the end and you receive them later on. I don't know, but I'm just telling you what the word means and what the exactitude of the word, right, the implication. So don't get too worked up about that, but that is the reality. Father bless. I remember listening to the Orthodox Survival Course lecture you were giving, and you said that before Vatican II, they doubted the sanctity or the sainthood of St. George. Is this accurate? Crazy. It was actually after Vatican II, right after Vatican II, there were commissions, and these commissions issued up a whole list of saints that they could absolutely embrace as real people. And there were major saints that they doubted, including St. George, including St. Catherine, and other major saints, because for whatever reason in their criteria and mindset, there could be doubt about their very existence and whether they were really martyred. They created a list of, to be venerated and then to not really be venerated. And I seen it with my eyes, and I also got it from Bishop Basil, essay of the Antiochian Archdiocese. He had in his library these this study, this book, this document. I don't remember what it was that they issued from the Vatican. So it was right after Vatican II. This is like 1968. And there's a whole list of great saints that we celebrate that they no longer venerate officially as like on their festal calendar. I haven't looked at that in 25 years, but I remember distinctly seeing it. So God help them if they are, allowing academics to now tell them who is a saint and if they exist or not. With the intercession of saints, with them being alive in heaven, can I talk to them like they are standing beside me, or does it need to be focused prayer? So what would you do if they were standing beside you? Would you just have a chat with them, or would you approach them like many people, for instance, I saw approaching Elder Ephraim with tremendous reverence, or St. Paisios, right? They would certainly be able to speak to them. I'm not saying like they're elitist or something, but the approach of the people was always with tremendous respect. So first of all, that's how you would approach a saint, no matter if they in the body or out of the body or in this life or in the next life. But secondly, we approach them prayerfully, asking their intercession. We would approach them just like we would, the Mother of God or the Lord in prayer. Now, you all know this. You're Orthodox. You're not confused Reformed Protestants. We're not treating them like divinity. We're not imagining they're everywhere present and fills all things like God, right? They're not omniscient. They're not omnipresent. They're in Christ. And in Christ, there's communion and union and unity. And through and in Christ, all things happen. And so Christ gives to many saints in this world the ability and the gift of seeing the future prophets, seeing in time and space through a gift of foresight or clairvoyance. There's many gifts of God that we see in the lives of the saints. If that can happen while they're in the body in this world, how much more can God do whatever he likes for those who departed and are now in him and in his bosom and worshiping him night and day, as they did in this life anyway. So I think that's how you would approach it. You would ask their prayers, you would beg their intercessions, you would give thanks and to them as you do in the same kind of piety in the church generally. Excuse me. How does the church receive men who've had vasectomies, and does it disqualify them from the priesthood? That's a great, interesting question. Obviously, as you're implying, and vasectomies are not blessed. They're not something the church would ever bless. It's a terrible thing to do to yourself. But having done it, obviously, you repent of it. You go on, and you go on to struggle. But that is something that I think could be considered, could be interpreted as an obstacle to the priesthood, because with regard to the priesthood, it's very clear in the canons that there could be no, there has to be integrity to the body. There cannot be like a missing hand or foot or eye or anything, right? The church wants the person who's going to serve as a priest not only functionally but spiritually and bodily to be whole, there's a level and a standard for the priesthood which is greater than anything else in the church. So I would think that it could be an obstacle, but ultimately it's the decision of the bishop, and he would examine that and he would see, and he would judge if that's applicable. But I think that one could interpret it as such, but that doesn't mean that every bishop will have the same approach. And I think that that's what economia is all about, right? Because there's different cases, different reasons, there's different backgrounds, and so it'd be up to the bishop to decide. Yeah. I thought that too. It is a great concern, but in my experience, God does the evangelizing through the church into the whole world. That is a mystery, so I cannot say anything more. I'm not really he's answering Connor Walking Son, and I don't know the other parts of that discussion, so I'm going to just leave it. I'm becoming a catechumen in September, but I want to know if I only receive Antidoron on Sundays, not communion, yet do I have to fast from midnight on? That's a great question. So yeah, you should. I mean, this is a pastoral question for a priest. Your spiritual father, your priest will answer this question ultimately. But if you're asking me, I would think that it would be good for you to fast from the night on, even if you are not communing. And it is a pious custom among faithful to fast for Antidoron. I don't think they fast as long as they would for Holy Communion. Let's say there was a Vesperal liturgy on the feast of, let's say, Holy Saturday or whatever, and you're not going to bed at 10 and getting up at 8 or something, or 6. And there was, so you could approach and receive Antidoron after a shorter fast. Now, what is a shorter fast? I don't know if it's not written anywhere, so it's up to the spiritual father, but 6 hours, 4 hours, maybe. But whereas Holy Communion, I think, would be at least 6 hours, maybe 8, depending on the spiritual father. So in terms of fasting, but it's good for you, even if you are not going to approach Holy Communion. Obviously, you're not baptized, to begin that, make that a way of life. And so when you do and are baptized, you're ready to go, and it's a part of the way of life. I mean, as a rule, you should be doing everything the church does except participating in the mysteries. No baptism, no chrismation, no communion, obviously. Therefore, the mysteries are off limits to anyone who's not been initiated, but all the rest should become a way of life for you. Fasting, prayer, and all that implies. I attended the elementary school that I thought was SSPX, but my 6th grade diploma says SSPV. Yes, so did you? Yeah, here it is. It is a traditional Latin group in New York, anti-Vatican II. Interesting, but it's in communion, is it not? SSPV, is that the one in communion with the Pope, or is it not? Let's do it. I'll just do a search. SSPV versus SSPX. Let's see what it brings up. Okay, so Society of Pius X acknowledges the validity of modern popes but rejects post-Vatican II reforms, while the Society of Pius V is sedevacantist. Oh, okay, it's even more extreme. Interesting. Believing the papal seat has been vacant since 1958. All right, so SSPV is even farther to the right and sedevacantist, meaning they don't believe the popes since Vatican II are popes. So you're hardcore, they say. On reception into Orthodoxy, many bishops lose baptism and allow chrismation. Loose baptism? What does that mean? Who are you to go against bishops from other jurisdictions? For the Antiochians, chrismation is the norm. Oh, okay. This is a question for me, I guess. Well, I guess my question to you is who are you and I to question the saints? Did you know that Saint Paisios had people after chrismation baptized? How about Saint Jacobos? How about Elder Ephraim? How about Elder Emilianos? How about Elder Parthenius, who's still alive, is 50 years abbot of St. Paul's Monastery? So maybe we shouldn't be so quick to run and assume that this question is so obvious and so clear. At least let's give the benefit of the doubt. Antiochian jurisdiction or the Russian jurisdiction or the Greek jurisdiction is absolutely 100% the authority for their parishes and priests and everything else. And anybody in those parishes obviously is under their authority. And so I'm not under their authority. I'm not an Antiochian priest. So what if my bishop says everybody should be baptized? Am I supposed to ignore that and in deference to another jurisdiction? When you say I go against bishops from other jurisdictions, well, what of the people who are mandating and screaming, as I saw a video just a couple of days ago, a priest literally screaming at the homily, calling those who require and demand or require baptism heretics. So we have a priest now who is imagining that it is a heresy to baptize and to insist on baptism and to say that it's a mistake to chrismate. He's now calling the St. Paisios, St. Porphyrios, St. Jacobos. I don't know about St. Porphyrios. I think so, but I don't have any data on that. All the Athenites, Elder Ephraim, they're all heretics now. What about him? Do you think we should reprimand him for going against bishops and saints from quote unquote other jurisdictions? The whole approach is problematic. It's very legalistic. Your approach to the whole question is not, what do the saints say? Let's follow the saints. I don't hear that in your question. I don't see that in this online discussion realm. Why not? What are we afraid of? Let's follow the saints. What do the saints say? The consensus of the saints today. Let's start with the saints today who are living right now in the last 30, 40 years, dealing with these very pastoral questions we're dealing with. Don't you think we should listen to them? What do they say? What have they done? Right? When Elder Ephraim is glorified, and he will be glorified as a saint, there's no question about it. They're already talking about it in the patriarchate, and they're already pushing for it among the hierarchy of the patriarchate, which I think is very premature. But anyway, whatever God allows. When he's glorified as a saint, and you all know that he absolutely was a zealot on this question, right? As all Athenites, almost not all, a lot of Athenites are. Athenites of the old school, right? So when that happens, what are you going to do? You're going to say he's a heretic? You're going to say how dare him? What are you going to say? Should we not at least recoil from such absolute, language when we have saints in our day who are saying it is a mistake to chrismate? Should we not say, well, maybe we shouldn't be so dogmatic about it? And you're telling me we should only listen to one jurisdiction and their bishops and everybody else should be quiet when we have saints who are actually very opposed? And we need to explain why, right? It's not enough just to say it. Why? Why were they opposed? Do you care? You should care. Because coming down for 250 years now, from the Patriarchate of Constantinople, in the Badalion, Saint Nicodemus, Saint Paisios Vereshkovsky, Saint Athanasius of Paros, Saint. You notice how I said Saint. I didn't say bishop or priest or academic. They all unanimously said the presuppositions for economia, which is perfectly acceptable to do economia, the presuppositions for this economia, however, do not exist. They do not exist in the church, and it is pastorally unjustifiable. But he said, even according to Crivia and according to economia, there's no basis to receive the Latins, how much more the Reforms, Protestants, Papal Protestants, Latins, there's no basis to receive them except by baptism. That's the saints talking about it. for 250 years. St. Paisius Velikoski was adamant that uniates should be baptized. So are you going to say that he's all washed up and a heretic like this other priest did? What do you think? Let's get educated on the whole history of the topic. Let's stand with humility before the saints, and let's not become zealots like this priest, this poor priest who doesn't know the issue, obviously, to be saying such a thing. He obviously does not know the issue, because how could he possibly call out the saints as heretics? So there's missing parts to this discussion. People think that our position or the saints' position is that economia doesn't exist. No, of course economia is impossible. It's impossible to take economia from a bishop. However, the exercise of economia has presuppositions and has criteria. They're not met today. Therefore, yes, theoretically it's possible. In practice, pastorally, spiritually, even dogmatically, because of ecumenism and the threat now, it is unjustified and baseless and not according to the saints' wisdom to receive by chrismation, because the presuppositions don't exist. That's the position. Now, take that position seriously, engage it, and address it, and not just go on the company man knee-jerk reaction. Right? That's not helpful. It's not helpful to the church. It's not helpful to the discussion. It's not helpful to you. You should come with respect to the position of the saints. Learn it, and then answer it. If you think the saints are all washed up, bring it on. But don't just go with the company man, authority. This is very papist. Like, the authority has spoken. Shut up. That's not orthodox. Like, saints don't do that. They don't call on you to do blind obedience to them. Saints don't do that. They say, here's what the fathers say. Here's why. Here's why. If I started going to an Orthodox church and had not been baptized into the church, wouldn't it be disrespectful for me to kiss an icon? I'd be filthy and unworthy, wouldn't I? No. No. Who's worthy? I mean, show veneration, show love, show respect. I'm assuming you're like an inquirer or you're a catechumen. Is that what you're talking about? And you're coming with love and respect, desiring to approach the church, and you want to show love. You want to love the saints. That's how we express our love, right? Respect and love. I don't know what's the problem. As a seeker, not yet a catechumen, how serious is it that the church I've been attending has deleted the word men from the symbol of faith? Not translated as people, but deleted entire. So what is it now? For us and for our salvation? I mean, is that the problem? Now it's not for us men and our salvation, it's just us and our salvation? That's very much of the world, and it's sad that they're kind of inclining toward the world, spirit of the world today, but it's not a departure from the meaning necessarily, right? They still say us. I'm assuming that's the portion of the creed you're talking about. It depends on how their mentality is expressed in other ways. If it's really a modernist mindset, if it's a feminist mindset, I don't know. That's something you would need to learn more and be patient and see. I don't know how big of an implication that is. You need to see it in context. Is there a comparison between the SSPX and the Old Believers' existence after the reforms of Patriarch Nikon? Sure. I mean, on a very basic general level, sociological, historical, there's similarities, but that's about it. It's a very different situation. But yeah, there's some similarities. What can a secular theist do in order to test the claims of Christianity, to know if he can trust it or believe it? Well, the first thing he's doing is he's trusting himself. A secular theist. What is that even? A secular theist. Those things are actually kind of opposed, aren't they? Like, secular means of the world, a world, like the world meaning the passions. And then a theist is somebody who believes in God, right? So they're like combining two different things that are somewhat opposed. But anyway, in order to test the claims of Christianity, it's an empirical question. Come and see. Come and meet. Come and learn from the saints. Apply, look for empirical evidence of the presence of God, right? That's what you want to do, right? And then when we have experience, trust it grows, right? Do you trust anybody you never met? If you just see somebody on the street, do you have implicit trust 1,000%? I just trust this person. No. On a human level, no. You have to get to know them, learn about their history, spend some time with them. And over time, when the friendship is proven, then trust grows, right? That's on a human level. Now, obviously, the presence of God himself, our Father, Christ, whose image we are made, there's going to be an implicit trust spiritually. If you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you have an open heart, a humble heart, you're going to implicitly trust him just by being in his presence. That's what this says in the scriptures, right? In the scriptures, people said, oh my God, just being in his presence, hearing his words, no man has ever spoken like this man has spoken. All right. So in the case of our Lord, I think just being in his presence will imbue trust, grow trust. But it depends on your receptivity. It depends on your humility. It depends on your own ability to trust. Maybe you've been burned, and many, many people have been burned from childhood today, right? And I'm looking at the poll, sorry. And they are very, very weary of trust because they were burned from the earliest days. And so there's all kinds of things you're carrying with you, baggage, perhaps many people are. And so it, makes it hard for you to trust, but that's on you, right? I mean, that might be justifiable, but it's still on you. It's not like God's problem. So there's a lot of things there that would need to be flushed out. Is there a way to ever know for sure? Of course there is. But what are we all doing here? But what do you mean by know? What do you mean by knowledge? The knowledge that Paul talks about, I've said this a million times, St. Paul talks about is epignosis, which is hands-on experiential knowledge. That's the knowledge that the apostles had. They saw him, they heard him, they touched his hands and his side, right? And they had experiential eyewitness knowledge. That's the knowledge that brings a surety, right? Not an academic speculative knowledge, not a heady rationalistic knowledge. That doesn't ever really bring surety. It brings, what's the word? Not surety, but something very likely, like a likeliness. But surety comes through communion and union and unity and experience of that in the depths of your heart, soul, and mind, right? And that's what you encounter in the life of the church, in the presence of the grace of God, in the presence of the Lord. And that's something you have to come empirically and try and test. But you got to be open too, right? Don't come with a closed mind and heart and then say, well, God, I don't believe. Okay, well, you never would believe anyway. So you've got to be open too. What happens if a layperson is a godparent and later decides to become a monk? Does he or still remain responsible for his godchild, even though he has died of the world or remains forever? I think forever, you're going to be now called upon to pray fervently, not to socially catechize, but you're still going to be praying. And in that sense, you're going to help from the monastic life. Father, is it permissible for a married couple to use condoms within marriage? It's interesting. I have a live stream coming up in about 3 weeks, all about contraceptives. So I encourage you to come and listen. Just look at the schedule. You can go and look at the schedule. Let me just bring it up here for you over on X. I can show you the schedule so you won't miss it. Let me share with you our channel over here on X. Where is it? And this is, this here. All right. July 23rd on contraceptives, the Orthodox teaching. Look at our schedule. Check it out. There it is. All right. July 21st, forerunner of the second coming, the prophet Elias. We're going to talk all about the prophet Elias. Great figure, important figure for many reasons. He is the forerunner of the second coming. Great prophetic figure. I think it's time to talk about him. On contraceptives, July 23rd, the Orthodox teaching. Very important for all of us because, well, I think everybody knows why. July 28th, the days and works of St. Nicodemus the Hagurite and St. Athanasius of Paros. We're going to be talking about the new book that's coming out from Uncommon Press, Philokaliac Renaissance, the days and works of St. Nicodemus the Hagurite and St. Athanasius of Paros. Very great book by Father Theodore Zisius that'll be coming out from our press, hopefully about that time, maybe in a month. We'll have it ready. And then July 30th is divorce and remarriage blessed in the Orthodox Church. Very hot topics for all of you, especially all of you out there who are enmeshed in the papal Protestant, hardcore Latin world that think they want to imagine they understand the teaching of the Orthodox Church on contraceptives, and they understand the teaching of the Orthodox Church on divorce and remarriage, and they use it all the time as red herrings and ways to keep people fearful of becoming Orthodox. Oh gosh, they've innovated, they've departed, we'll see. Come and see. Thank you, Mr. JohnMarion.com. I don't think .com is a part of your name, but I don't know what to say because that's what you got there. Thank you for your presence tonight and your support. Is the Dewey Reams, the Ethiopian Bible, profitable to read for me who is converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? We don't read either of those in the Orthodox Church, so I cannot recommend those. I don't have any basis to recommend those. I don't know of any hierarchy or church or saint that would recommend those. I'm not saying that they don't have some merit. I don't know. I don't read them. But I know that the Orthodox Church has its own very well-attested and ancient scriptural manuscript history. We have the patriarchal text, and that's been translated, and you can find that in, for instance, the 2-volume Orthodox New Testament. The Orthodox New Testament, it's published by a monastery in Colorado. I think it's called the Holy Apostles Convent or Holy Mission. But if you just put the Orthodox New Testament, 2 volumes, that text, very close to the Greek, very literal translation, has a lot of commentary from the fathers. It's what I always recommend, not because I'm a big fan of this particular monastery or jurisdiction because they have issues, but because whoever did this work, I think, had the right approach. Now, there are other things out there, like the one from New Rome Press. I don't like them, unfortunately. I wish I could endorse them, but I don't like the modern English. And I'm sorry that they chose to use modern English. It's not the tradition of the Orthodox translation into English. We have a tradition. We have a history. We did not do that until recently. We shouldn't do it today. There is a history going back over 130 years of how to translate into English in the proper exalted English. So they didn't choose to do that. But then the other thing is they have the Book of Enoch. What are they thinking? We don't have the Book of Enoch in the Orthodox Church. We never embraced that as a canonical literature. And now with all this speculation around the sons of Seth and the giants and all this stuff, terrible timing to confuse the heck out of people and put the Book of Enoch in the EOB or whatever they're calling it. I don't understand how they could do that. Why would you do that? Father, I'm 42, no wife, no kids. I'm scared. If I go to church, I'm going to look like a weirdo. Any advice? What should I do? Well, welcome to the Orthodox Church. We're all a bunch of weirdos. To the world. I mean, didn't we already talk about this tonight? Saint John, who's today we are celebrating his memory. He was called out by his parishioners for being disheveled and not wearing shoes. And they wrote twice to the Metropolitan and tried to reprimand him and get him shoes on. Get that man shoes. Look, you're not going for the other people. You're going for Christ. You're going to church to be with the Lord. Do what you got to do to avoid that, right? Put some nice clothes on. You're going to church. Don't go there in a bunch of clothes you'd go to the park or the beach on, Right? Go with nice clothing. All of us should do that. If you go to church with the same clothes that you lay around on the couch and you go to the beach on, you got a problem. Like, you're not well spiritually. You're not going to the beach. You're going to the Lord. Go presentable. Go with respect. If you were to go to the president's Oval Office, you would be in your best clothing. You should be, unless you've got a problem in your head. Right? You show respect by that. And that actually changes your disposition and your stance. Right? So, this is off topic. Obviously, you didn't ask me about this, but I'm just taking an opportunity to tell everyone, go with your best clothing to church. Show your love and respect in that way. It's not hard. This is not some, big obstacle for people. You don't have to spend $1 zillion. Just get some nice clothing and show respect. And if you do that, you're not going to be a weirdo because you're not married and you're 42. Come on. You know how many people out there? I've got tons of people who are in their 30s and 40s who are not married. And it's an epidemic because of the way we've changed our whole society. We're not living in small villages anymore. It's very hard to find. There's 1,000 reasons behind sociological, historical, but personal, why we're not married and why we're not, many people that are not married until late. And, it's not good, but it is the reality for a lot of people today. We could talk about that sometime. Maybe we'll talk about it on the divorce and marriage live stream in a few weeks. Thank you, Ortho Tabel. Interesting. Thank you for, God bless you. Your blessed Father, please question, as an inquirer, is it blessed to observe fasting during the week as Orthodox do? Thank you. I'm not your spiritual father. I'm not your priest. But if you're asking me, I don't see why you shouldn't start little by little. Don't chew off more than you could swallow, right? Little by little, begin living the life of the church. And as you grow and you become a catechumen, and then you live the life of the catechumen for 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it takes, you're going to do everything the church does. And you're going to do it for months before you're initiated by baptism. And that will prepare you, purify you, and prepare you for initiation. So, yes, start little by little fasting, praying the Jesus prayer, reading the lives of the saints. Why not? Why not? Just don't go crazy. Don't go off. Don't go think you're a big shot. Stay humble, low to the ground. You're nobody. We're nobody. If we knew the saints just a little bit, we would be so extremely humbled. We would be like, oh my goodness, I am nobody. I'm a nobody before the lives of the saints, before the greatness of the saints. Father, thank you for all you do. God willing, I'll be a catechumen soon. Thanks to you and all your lectures. Please pray for me, my husband, Aura, and Andrew. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God. God bless you. I've seen you here week after week for years, right? Going on years, isn't it? It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Thank God. It's really wonderful to hear. Father bless. In the house, we have the none other, the one and only Conrad. Thank you for the great stream. How important is the resolution of the American ecclesiastical situation in multiple jurisdictions? Very important. Of course, it's extremely important. I should have talked about that, and thank you for reminding me. But it won't happen until the other things, the bigger elephants in the room, are taken care of. Modernism, ecumenism, secularism, these things have to be dealt with. And then the jurisdictional administrative unity will be super easy. Like, they could literally get together over tea and sign the documents. So our problems are elsewhere. And mainly it's the elephant in the room, which is called ecumenism. Right? There are other things too. There's pride, and there's arrogance, and there's jurisdictionalism, and there's philotism, and there's all these various things that are afflicting various parts and people in the body of Christ. I get that. But ultimately, anything touching on the dogma of the church, the Orthodox phronema, with regard to the body of Christ, that is ultimately the spiritual obstacle that will not allow true unity. We have to have a hierarch, a first hierarch that is humble, traditional, ascetic, and acclaimed by all the other bishops, who will then lead the church here to a vibrant and properly Orthodox oriented hierarchy a synod, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if we don't have that, then even if we did move and kind of force an administrative unity, which would be technically blessed, right, on a level of just, obviously that's what the canons call for, it wouldn't work. I don't think it would work. I think it would fall apart because it's a huge spiritual struggle that the devil would be fighting against tooth and nail. So you've got to understand the spiritual principles, and the first comes, what comes first, and then this is downstream. It's not first. And the fact that we're not there should tell you, all you need to know about where we're at and what we got to work on. But there's so few people who are even talking about this in those places that they should be talking about. So there's going to be cataclysmic events before we get our act together, I think, unfortunately. Are there any cultural problems with so many evangelicals becoming Orthodox, and how are the older members feeling about this? This is an old story going back decades, when we had the 2,000 evangelicals come into the Antioch Diocese in 1988. And so many places have already dealt with this on some basic level. No, I don't think there's huge. There are parishes that are dealing with it, yes. But as a phenomenon all across the board, no, it's largely in the rear view mirror of Orthodox America. I've been Orthodox since 1992, right? So that's 34 years. I've seen this issue come and then largely go by. Yes, there are parishes. Yes, it's still a problem. Yes, there are people struggling with this. Is there a spiritual problem? I think there's actually a pretty big spiritual problem with a lot of these converts come in and not being properly catechized. I talked about this earlier, right? That's really the problem. It's not so much a cultural problem as it is a spiritual problem. And there are very faithful so-called cradle or ethnic Orthodox who have a good sense of the Orthodox ethos, and they have a visceral reaction to some of these new converts, evangelicals, whatever, who are coming in with a the ethos is off. It's not an Orthodox ethos. And there's a lack of proper catechism initiation that is really the cause. Not so much they themselves, the new converts, that the problem is that they're not properly being catechized and properly being initiated. And that's what I pointed to in my talk. Father, with the intercession of saints, with them being alive in heaven, can I talk to them like they are standing? I think I've already done this. This is the second time this has come up. We've got to vet these questions so we don't have to go twice. Do you have any advice for maintaining Western Easter traditions with the Protestant family while maintaining the fast? I'm not really sure. You got to be more specific, but I think you're telling me, can you celebrate Pascha or Western Easter in the middle of an Orthodox fast? So like Palm Sunday, they're doing Easter, we're doing Palm Sunday, and how to deal with that? I mean, it's pretty much just straightforward, right? Don't break the fast. And then go over there, sit in a corner, show your love, show a lot of love, but don't participate in the heterodox prayers, and don't break your fast. And that will be, very silent. Don't talk about it. Don't promote it. Don't, if they try to get you to talk about it, be very, very laconic, 2 words. Don't like witness to them about your fasting. That's not how we do that. Just stay silent and do your thing. And they can get the message without you even saying much of anything. But show a lot of love on a human level so they know that what you're doing is not against them personally, but it's about being faithful to Christ and his church. And I think that's how you walk that tightrope. Father, okay, we've already done this too. I don't know why we're getting everything double. Did I go full circle or something? What's going on? Father, I'm currently attending the GOC parish, GOCK. As an inquirer, I've been for 6 months now, but we do not have a priest at the moment, and I question if the new CAL is an issue to avoid. The new calendar, Yeah, well, I highly recommend you watch the playlist I have here called, what are we calling it? Temptation on the Right, maybe? Or Zil Not a Country. I don't remember what it's all about this question of the old calendars. Yeah, I'm not someone who is going to support you going to the old calendars and being initiated and baptized there, because unfortunately, I don't know what the GOCK is. I forget what the K stands for, but in any case, the old calendars generally do not follow the Orthodox patristic methodology in dealing with heresy and the rise of heresy in the church. They do not follow the patristic, the contemporary or ancient patristic methodology, in my estimation, in my opinion. And so, yes, the calendar change was an innovation. No, it did not justify a schism and going into schism. And then the whole history of the old calendars in Greece, very problematic, and not at all the sanitized version that some of them would like you to believe. And so I can't get into all the details now. We've talked about this many times in this channel. I would highly recommend you not go through with your catechism there, but go to a local church which is faithful and anti-ecumenist within the local canonical Orthodox churches. And I say that with pain of heart, because I know all those people are very serious. They're Orthodox in terms of their confession of faith, but methodologically, I cannot support it. I cannot see it as a patristic response. Ultimately, I think it's problematic. Now, not every old calendars group is the same. Not every has the same history. I don't mean to generalize here. Some are, like the Matthewites, are really far out there ecclesiologically. Others are much closer. Some of them have a claim to canonical legitimacy. I don't address that issue. My problem is I don't see them following the saints in our day or in the recent past, and I don't see them imitating, following the patristic methodology in fighting heresy. And the fact that they reject, almost all of them, maybe there's some exceptions, they reject the sanctity, the holiness of many saints in the church today only on the basis that they did not cease communion and commemoration of the ailing hierarchs, the ones who are promoting the heresy of ecumenism, only on that basis, that because they did not cease communion, go into the old calendars, they cannot be saints, they are not saints, and they reject their sanctity. That shows a lack of discernment. It shows a lack of understanding and discernment. And they just are not, before a synodical decision, before a conciliar decision, condemning, anathematizing, laying down the boundaries, they're not in a position to tell us and to judge that matter. They're not. They think they are. They're going to go ahead and do it. They're going to assume all kinds of authority as if these things have all been dealt with in a conciliar way. There haven't been. And that is important. It does matter in the ultimate methodology of fighting against heresy. So anyway, I don't know if you understood. It sounds like you're a very newcomer, and some of this stuff probably just went over your head, but you understand, I think, the general sentiment. You can write me, if you want me to write me more at team@orthodoxethos.com. You can write me. I'll try to answer you there and give you, if you need practical advice, where to go, what to do, I'll try to do that for you. I've noticed past couple of weeks, you seem not to be tired, to not be tired. You work so hard to keep us fed. Thank you for your sacrifice, Father, you and your team. Thank you very much for the comments. Appreciate you showing love and care. I'm generally pretty tired. I'm getting older, and I feel like I'm tired, but I'm glad to hear that you don't see it. Father, so should I go to the Greek church or should I go to the OCA church? And Father, also, I'm sorry for what I said. It's just talk. It's just I talked to my Baptist mentor, and he kind of made me think that. Okay, don't worry about it. Generally not a good idea to listen to a Baptist if he's hasn't done some serious study on what the Orthodox missionaries have done over the centuries. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions made about Orthodoxy, usually not very good ones and not based on a lot of knowledge. So, should you go to a Greek church or should you go to OCA church? You can go to any church. I don't tell people not to go to one jurisdiction or another. Go to a church. Here's where you want to go. Go to a church where the priest and the people, generally speaking, especially the priest, is super committed to the saints, loves the saints, venerates the saints, has divine services on the saints, listens to the saints, is talking about the saints, is teaching from the saints, right? All the saints, but especially the saints of our day that God has given us for our time and our age to guide us through the many, many challenges that we're facing. the piety, love, and devotion to the choir of the saints is a really important factor if you're going to make progress with a priest and a parish. So that's the criteria. It's not OCA or Greek or Russian. It's, are they lovers of prayer, divine services? Are they pious and devout? And you know, of course, the confession of faith, of course, Orthodoxy. There is both and in all the jurisdictions. The Greeks, the OCA, they all have modernist, unfortunate, you know, examples where people are not really expressing Orthodoxy, unfortunately, but they have wonderful priests, devout priests, lovers of virtue, lovers of piety, not interested in ecumenism. And so you can't generalize. You got to go and see. Glory to God, I'm getting baptized soon in my Greek Orthodox church. Any tips on finding a saint's name? Prayer, reading a lot of lives of saints, and then when you find one that really touches you, really speaks to you, then go with that. That would be my suggestion. And so that means you're spending time in the Synaxarium, you're spending time in the lives of the saints, and and you're not just walking up to the plate, so to speak, but you've done your homework. And in that search, prayerfully asking God, He will reveal to you someone who you can really look up to and be guided by their teachings and writings and example. Doesn't have to be necessarily somebody in our day, but it's helpful if the saint has writings and the life that's accessible to you, so you can get to know them and really come to love them. I think we already did that. For some reason, there's like double comments. I'm not sure what's going on. May the Lord bless and keep you, Father, granting you strength, wisdom, and peace in your sacred ministry through the prayers. May God guide and protect all those trusted here. Thank you so much. It's very kind and nice sentiments. And this is Garland and Cassidy. Do you think America will survive to 260? To 260? What am I missing here? To 2060? Is that what you wanted to say? You must mean that. Like, in other words, we're now in 2026. Are we going to go to 2060? Another 34 years. So you're not asking about the world. You're asking about America. I don't know. I'm not a prophet in terms of political reality. I could see America falling apart. I could see it. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. I could see America falling apart in 5 or 10 years, and it's going to be partly because of the fabric and the whole way it's been built, and especially over the last 50 years, and partly because it's controlled demolition. I could see it falling apart. I don't know. I would probably be a little skeptical to say, as we know it, America being the same in 2060. 34 years from now, it'll be a very different America. I don't know if it'll fall apart politically, but it'll be a very different America. Is smoking a sin? Well, generally, the saints that have talked about it in the last 200 years, because it's a fairly new phenomenon for most Orthodox Christians in the last couple hundred years, maybe back into this 18th century, maybe, they have not been positive. St. John of Kronstadt initially did it and then realized it was a demonically inspired thing and it badly affected him and he quit it. St. Nicodemus calls it the incense of the devil. So there's maybe one example or two of some that did it, but I don't think they're praised for it. I don't think the church says this is a great example, imitate it. So generally speaking, it's considered a missing of the mark. Better not to do it. Doesn't help you spiritually. It doesn't help you physically. It's not something that's actually, you just don't see saints doing it. Like, it's like very rare. So we imitate the saints, we follow them. And if they're not doing it, then we don't need to really think much about it, right? We can pretty much write that one off and move on. I just don't think it's going to tell me how it helps you to become like Christ. First of all, of course, Christ wasn't smoking, but I mean, the little Christs weren't smoking. It's very rare to find a saint that's doing it. So I just don't see how on what basis I could say, blessed is the Lord. I don't see how I could do that. A priest once told me that the old calendars could have remained a part of the church and just kept the old calendar as part of the Orthodox Church, thus avoiding schism. Is that true? Yes, but I don't think it was ever just the calendar issue. Right? It was never only the calendar issue. It was behind the calendar issue. They saw and smelled a rat, the humanistic, secularist mindset that you could see, unfortunately, in somebody like Miletus Metaxakis. So their instincts were good, in my opinion. And we have holy ones who are struggling for orthodoxy, that their instincts were, we have a problem here that it's not just, the calendar was an occasion to show forth a departure into a modernist, ecumenistic stance. All right. So their instincts were good. Their methodology was wrong, is wrong, in my opinion, in my understanding, and in the saints, frankly. I mean, of all the saints commemorated and celebrated in the church for the last 50 years, very few, to but a handful on less than one hand, are going to be sympathetic and speak well of the old calendarist IST movement that ends up being what it is today, which is basically denying the grace of God and the mysteries and denying the saints in the local churches. That's where we're at in a lot of the old calendarist groups, right? So if that's the fruit of old calendarist methodology, then God help us, because that's certainly not leading to the defeat of the heresy of ecumenism. What insane person could think that, that's essential if we're going to overcome the heresy of ecumenism? We've got to deny the grace of God and the mysteries, and we've got to deny the sanctity of all these holy elders and saints because, they didn't do what we're doing. It's very legalistic, the approach, in my opinion, again. So instincts correct, methodology wrong, and the fruits have shown that the methodology was not patristic, in my opinion. Again, you're asking me, I'm telling you. I don't think they could have easily stayed because I don't think it was just a calendar question. Does that make sense? They could have stayed, of course. And there are those using the old calendar. In the Church of Greece, for instance, we have a Metoki, a church that came in from the old calendars about 30 years ago. And it is on the old calendar, and it's in Thessaloniki, and it's a Metoki of Gregoriou. And so that worked. Anything's possible with God. Certainly that could have happened. But I don't know if they wanted it to happen, if they would have allowed it, because their ecclesiological response to the calendar change and the innovations that were coming out of the so-called Congress of Constantinople in 1923 and 4, their response was, we must break, right? Ultimately. But a lot of them regretted it initially. And then I think some in our day regretted it. Not many, but some. I bought an icon from an artist and have two painted for me by a cousin who is not a nun, but goes to church. Do I have to take them to church to be blessed since they were not bought in church? There's different practices in different local churches. So some say you don't need to bless icons. They're already blessed because they're icons. But others say, no, it's good to take it and put it in the altar and leave it there and have it blessed by just, a prayer or holy water on it or the presence in the holy altar. So I don't know. Talk to your priest. You can certainly do that if they accept that. Father, I have a question. I have some medical issues and I have to take medicine at certain times. Is it okay to take these meds in the middle of service? I don't have to leave to take them. If you have to and you have no choice because it's a medical condition, then I think that's not breaking the fast and, all the rest. But if you can avoid it during services or in the morning when you wake up and you're not going to be sick or you're not going to have medical issues, then you should. You should do the struggle for 3-4 hours until after communion. But this is a question for your spiritual guide, your priest, your spiritual father. He's going to give you the best answer. But that's the distinction I would make. If it's absolutely unavoidable, then it's not a breaking of the fast, and it's not, problematic, because you can't avoid it. You have a medical condition. That's fine. But if you can, you should try. You should try to wait. So I don't know what to tell you ultimately because I'm not there with you. Eveliti Pater, I'm flying to Mount Athos for 1 month next week. Thank you for your streams. Glory to God. And God bless your trip. I hope you have a very blessed pilgrimage. I hope you get out to see various parts of Athos, or do whatever you want. But that first time around, it's always good to see a few things. How do I protect my unborn grandchild from a witch that is friends with my daughter? Lord have mercy. I pray a lot, but there's something else I can do. Is there a certain prayer for protection from witches? Well, the most important is the daughter and her life. And if she's giving rights to the devil in any way, that she not do that she's praying, that she is staying away from the friends and the witch. That's why is she around people who are friends who's a witch? Like, why? That's the problem. So if you can't solve that because your daughter is not pious and doesn't understand the bad idea here, don't be around witches who are serving the enemy of our salvation, then pray fervently. Yes, pray fervently. Generally, stay away, right? And don't provoke and stay away. But if you're prayerful and you're communing, confessing, you don't have anything to worry about. You haven't given rights to the devil, and there's no power over you as long as you're faithful, communing, confessing, Orthodox Christian. Father bless, if my priest is unavailable and I try to confess with another priest, some say I need my priest's blessing to do this, yet my priest says I don't need to. Does the church teach on this? If your priest gives you the blessing to go to another priest to confess, then you're fine. That's what you want to be obedient to your spiritual father or priest. And if he says, yes, if I'm not available, go to this priest, it's not a problem. But you should, if I was that priest and there was some reason why you needed to go to another clergyman for confession, I would want to still stay abreast and understand what's happening with you. Otherwise, what's the point? Just go to that other priest and stay there. Don't go back and forth. That's not a good idea. But if it's exceptional or it's a question of distance or something like that, then, there's a pastoral need and the priest needs to stay on top of it, but he can certainly bless it. My father's father lived in Palestine before Islam, before Judaism, heresy, but now only a small portion of us left in the Holy Land. Please pray for my brothers and sisters being attacked by Zionists. Lord have mercy. Oh, so sad to hear. So sad to watch. So sad. And how demonic it all is. How terribly demonic is what's happening to the Christians in the Middle East and in the Holy Land. But you will have a great reward in heaven. God has great things in store for those who are suffering and patiently enduring and praying, not cursing, right? So look at it as an opportunity for eternal rewards in spite of it all, in spite of the tragedy and the hatefulness and the demonic inspiration that's behind the destruction. Those are very hard things to stomach, let alone experience. And yet, the Lord is allowing them, so there must be a spiritual profit for you available to you. I really encourage you, no matter how hard it gets, to look for that. Look for the hand of God in spite of it all and what he's going to bring out of it for eternal life. There's something there, a lot there, a lot of potential for becoming like Christ in the middle of those terrible events. We should all pray fervently for our brothers and sisters in Lebanon and Israel and the West Bank and Syria and Gaza and all these who are suffering at the hands of people who are absolutely unhinged and not serving God. Father bless, how should a catechumen that had fallen into sexual sin, how should it be gone about? I so desire the mystery of confession, but I'm at least 6 months away from baptism. I've said this before, I'm not sure what's going on with some of the clergy. You as a catechumen go to confession. You must go to confession. You must go and confess all of your sins from your childhood and a life confession before baptism. There's no reason why you cannot begin now. To begin and go 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 times even, if need be, all of that will be either the prayer will be read or it'll be washed away in baptism. But the confession is a part of your preparation. The confession is a part of your preparation for baptism and for life in Christ. And it begins even during the catechumenate. So maybe not immediately in the beginning of the catechumenate, but at some point, 6 months in or 7 or 8, and then getting closer and closer to baptism, there needs to be a full life confession. And that'll be very good for you. And there's no reason not to happen. Father bless, after much struggle and going to different parishes, I found one that the priest would baptize me, but they follow the old calendar. What should I do? Now, depends what you mean they follow the old calendar. The whole Russian church follows the old calendar. So does the Georgian. So does the Serbian. So if you're just on the old calendar, but in a canonical church, there's no problem. But if you're in an old calendarist parish that is broken off from the local churches and condemns the local churches and doesn't accept the saints of the local churches and all the rest that unfortunately goes along with being in the so-called zealots or old calendarists, well, that's a problem. You can't go there. You should not be there. Although I am very sympathetic to their struggle, their methodology, as I said several times here tonight, is not the patristic methodology, and therefore it will not lead to where you need to go. There's going to be problems spiritually. But I am answering from 1,000 feet up. I don't know what parish you're talking about. I don't know if you've been talking about old calendarists. So it's very hard for me to answer your question, right? I'm giving you a general assessment. You need to get specifics and have somebody there spiritually who can kind of help you navigate. And if you don't have a priest it seems like you can't find a priest in a parish nearby, can you get to a monastery? Can you go visit one of the monasteries of Elder Ephraim? I don't know where you're located, but that would be very helpful to navigate things. Or if you want to write me, I'll try to answer your questions more specifically. Is visiting a monastery as a complete newcomer to not only Orthodox Christianity, but religion in general a bad idea? I'm intrigued. I live not far from the St. John Monastery in Manton, California. I think that it'd be okay to visit, but don't assume you understand. Go there with a very open mind, a very humble mind, and don't assume you understand what you see, and don't ask a lot of questions. And then you see things you don't understand, just keep a big question mark in your mind. Maybe I don't understand that. That humility is really important in every aspect of our spiritual life, but more so when we don't have the basis to understand things and we're coming at it totally new, right? But I think it could be beneficial to get connected with the Orthodox nearby and including an Orthodox monastery. I think that's a good first step, and just come and see, take it a step at a time, and pray fervently to God. Like, you can pray and you should pray that God, guide you step by step. All right. Okay. I think we've come to the end of our questions. Believe it or not, 58 questions tonight. I think I answered them all, hopefully. I appreciate your patience. Hopefully it's been a beneficial lecture tonight. It's always amazing to me that we start off with 200 people, and by the end it's 600, 800, 1,000. I feel like now I want to start the lecture. That you're all here. It kind of reminds me of some parishes, ethnic parishes, where you're at the beginning of Orthros and there's 6 people in the church, and then by the end of Orthros there's 16 or 20 or 30 maybe, and then by the middle of Divine Liturgy there's 100, and you're like, where did all these people come from? Why did they come so late? Here we are, all of us together. But I've already finished everything. I've answered all the questions. What do I do now? I wish I could give you some more treats. Well, it is 3 hours. We pretty much always wrap it up at 3 hours. That's our kind of our policy. I know there are other people who go 4 or 5, 6 hours. I'm always amazed. Like, what are they doing for 6 hours online? That's an amazing thing. So what we'll do is we'll sign off. But before we sign off, we will give you some beautiful chanting and a little video. I've played this a few times in the past. I'm going to play it again tonight. It's Elder Athanasius Bentellineos talking about the Orthodox Church. Very important little video, but I hesitate sometimes to do it because I think it's easily misunderstood by the Protestants and their ecclesiology. So Elder Athanasius is going to give you the akrivia, the exactitude of our ecclesiology, but it doesn't mean he's playing the role of God and determining who's damned and who's saved and all the rest. Okay, so they're talking about the revelation, talking about the church, the nature of the church, what it means to be saved. Just a little video, 4 minutes. We're going to put some chant on, and then we'll go to that video in about 5 minutes, and then we'll sign off. And it's just a beautiful little video of a great contemporary elder giving us some really basic teaching about orthodoxy and heterodoxy, Orthodox understanding of the church and salvation. Again, according to the exactitude, according to what has been revealed to us, according to what is clear teaching, what will happen to all the people who don't hear the gospel or don't understand or don't come to the church. That's not what he's addressing. That's God, and only God can determine that, and only God does determine that. So let's not get confused. But it's very easy for most Protestants to get confused on this because their ecclesiology doesn't have any nuance in this way. Okay, that's it, folks. We'll be back. Actually, it's a big break now. We have a huge break because we're going to be traveling. We're going to be in Canada. We're going to be giving lectures. We're going to go to conferences. So the next time we're back, remember, let's add to the stage here. What's the next time we're back? It's going to be in 20 days. 20 days. All right. 21st. Not quite 20 days. 18 days, 19 days. 21st of July. 21st of July. We're back with you. Until then, we'll send a lot of clips. We'll have little reels. We'll have book announcements and new books on sale, and so pay attention to that. And highly recommend you go over to Uncut Mountain Press, uncutmountainpress.com, and get some of the great matristic material that's available for you for education. And we'll see you soon. God bless. Good night.
Βεβαίως η λέξη Ορθόδοξος αναμφισβήτητα δεν υπάρχει μέσα στην Αγία Γραφή. Αλλά τι θα πει Ορθόδοξος, τι θα πει Ορθοδοξία, τι θα πει Ορθοδοξό? Δεν θα πει τίποτε άλλο παρά ότι έχω ορθήν δόξαν. Δόξα θα πει γνώμη. Έτσι, από το δοκό, το ρήμα δοκό, δόξα θα πει γνώμη. Τελευταία σας έλεγα ότι δόξα θα πει και ψυχή. Υπάρχει τουλάχιστον μία φορά στους ψαλμούς η λέξη δόξα, που λέει τη δόξα μου, εννοεί την ψυχή μου. Λοιπόν, εδώ δόξα θα πει γνώμη, θα πει με άλλα λόγια τι πιστεύω. Και βεβαίως η λέξη Ορθοδοξία δεν υπάρχει, αλλά υπάρχει όμως η έννοια της ορθής πίστεως, η οποία αναμφισβήτητα λέγεται Ορθοδοξία. Γιατί οι αιρετικοί λένε και πού το γράφει αυτό για Ορθοδοξία? Μα αυτό είναι. Και ακόμη εμείς δεχόμεθα ότι μόνον οι Ορθόδοξοι θα σωθούν και όχι οι αιρετικοί. Αυτό τουλάχιστον πιστεύουμε και οφείλουμε να πιστεύουμε, διότι αν υπήρχε η σωτηρία και στην αίρεση, τότε σας ερωτώ, προς τι κάθε καυγάς γύρω από το θέμα της Ορθοδοξίας? Προς τι οικουμενικές σύνοδοι? Προς τι οι μάχες που έδωσαν οι πατέρες της Εκκλησίας μας, και μάλιστα από τον Μέγαν Αθανάσιον, αν θέλετε να πάω πιο παλιά, από τον Άγιο Ειρηναίο που ήταν εναντίον των γνωστικών, μέχρι τον Άγιο Μάρκο τον Ευγενικό που είναι πρώτης πτώσεως της Κωνσταντινούπολεως, μέχρι τον Άγιο Νικόδημο τον Αγιορείτη, μέχρι που θέλετε. Εις μάτιν αυτοί λοιπόν αγωνίστηκαν? Αναμφισβήτητα όχι, διότι μην ξεχνάμε ότι η σωτηρία είναι καρπός της συνισταμένης της ορθής πίστεως, Ορθοδοξίας, και της ορθής βιωτής, δηλαδή της ορθοπραξίας. Αυτό τουλάχιστον εμείς δεχόμεθα, γιατί αυτό βγαίνει μέσα από την Αγία Γραφή. Το λέει στη Σαμαρίτιδα γυναίκα, ότι οι αληθινοί προσκυνητέ θα προσκυνήσουν τον Θεόν, τον Πατέρα, τον Θεόν, εν πνεύματι και αληθεία. Βλέπετε εκείνο το και αληθεία, όχι με την έννοια μόνο την πνευματική, αλλά και με την έννοια της αληθείας, διότι και ο αιρετικός μιλάει για κάτι το πνευματικό, αλλά αυτό το πνευματικό είναι εν αληθεία. Οπότε αν δεν είναι, δεν είναι καν πνευματικό αυτό. Πώς είναι δυνατόν αυτός ο άνθρωπος, αφού έχει κακήν πίστη, βλάσφημον πίστη, αυτός ο άνθρωπος να έχει και καλή ζωή πνευματική? Είναι αδύνατον, διότι η ζωή του μετά δεν θα είναι ευάρεστος, διότι η ζωή απορρέει από την ορθή πίστη. Χωλαίνει λοιπόν η πίστη, χωλαίνει και η ζωή. Άρα πώς είναι δυνατόν αυτός ο άνθρωπος να σωθεί? Στην αίρεση η σωτηρία δεν υπάρχει. Τώρα, αν υπάρχουν κάποια εκατομμύρια Ρωμαιοκαθολικών και κάποια εκατομμύρια Προτεσταντών, που αυτοί οι άνθρωποι γεννήθηκαν μέσα σε αυτούς τους χώρους, το παρακάτω, αγαπητοί μου, είναι θέμα του Θεού. Τι θα κάνει ο Θεός είναι δικός του λογαριασμός. Εκείνο μόνο που ξέρουμε είναι ότι η σωτηρία δεν υπάρχει στην αίρεση, αλλά υπάρχει στην Ορθοδοξία και στην Ορθοπραξία.